Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. Yes, this is like the third live we have scheduled for this morning. Everything kept failing, but I guess this is going to stay by God's grace. Okay, it is 11:49 a.m. and today's date is the 10th of January 2025. How are you doing, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the live show. Yes, yes, y'all. We are back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing? Yes, of course, it is snowing here in Georgia. And yes, the South, it is snowing in the South. How are you guys doing? How is the weather where you are right now? How is the weather? With that being said, the legend, the OG, the 45th, now the 47th, has been sentenced. Okay. He has been sentenced to absolutely nothing. Isn't that wild? Imagine being sentenced to nothing. No jail time, no bail, no nothing. You didn't have to pay any fine. You didn't have to pay anything. You're just sentenced. You sent. I guess he's been sentenced to the White House. Trump has been sentenced to the White House. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the live show. Yes, yes, y'all. We are going to see what's going on in or what transpired in the Trump sentencing.
Breaking news out of a New York City courtroom right now. President-elect Donald Trump is being sentenced in his hush money conviction just 10 days before he is set to return to the White House. The unprecedented ruling follows a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court to deny Trump's last-minute appeal last night. CNN's Laura Coates is outside the New York court. Laura, walk us through where things stand right now. A lot of things happening at this very moment.
Well, we may not have been here, but for the Supreme Court last night deciding in a 5-4 decision, a very tight ruling where Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined with the so-called liberal justices to say that this could go forward. We knew from the judge it was unlikely that this is going to be a jail imposition or a probation period or a fine. The judge has now had an opportunity to review a probation report written in connection with interviews from the president-elect and the probation officer, who said during the report that it seemed that Trump believed he was, quote, above the law. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, the president-elect, soon to be president in just 10 days, is arguing that the indictment itself should never have been brought. The Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, was wrong to bring this, and that, in fact, the American people, according to Todd Blanche, who will be number 2 at the DOJ following his inauguration, has believed that the American people did not want a case like this to be brought under a category of lawfare. The judge, Judge Merchan, has said, which is the understatement of a lifetime, this has been a truly extraordinary case. Indeed, it has been. We have never seen a time when an American president, former, of course, or president-elect, has been convicted of felony counts, this to the tune of 34. Now, it is a Class E felony in the state of New York, which normally does not necessarily bring a jail time. It's not universally accepted as that, but it doesn't always have jail time. But the idea of no probation, no fine is directly connected from the decision of the judge, it seemed, and we're waiting to hear that final point. This is a president-elect who has argued that he would be unable to fully govern if he were to have certain contingencies or conditions above him. He does note, the judge said, it is the office of the presidency that is extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. But again, he is a president-elect. Trump wanted this to be delayed until after he became the president again. The judge thought it was incumbent on the decision to honor the jury's verdict and, of course, the rule of law to allow this particular defendant and all defendants to have the finality of a sentence. Jim, although we are using the phrase convicted felon, there is a slight nuance to this. It is not a done deal until after the sentence. And then that's the catalyst to be able to have your full appellate rights and go after all the different legal issues here. Merchan says that once the courtroom doors closed, the trial was no different from any other in the courthouse. I was in that courthouse. I got to tell you, what was so extraordinary, aside from the fact that it was the former president of the United States there, is that he was being treated, and in a courtroom, not like any other defendant, when the rule of law and the criminal prosecution and the weight of your name after a jurisdiction versus is in front of you.
Yeah, and Laura, I guess when this is all said and done, and you were just saying, and we've all been saying, we expect there not to be a sentence of jail time or anything like that for the president-elect. But take us through the next steps. He'll be able to appeal the conviction. That process continues on even while he's president?
Oh, yes, he wants it to continue on. He does not want this title of convicted felon. He does not believe that this case should have been resurrected according to the laws and on the books. But remember, ever since this case even started, he was convicted and a verdict entered back in May of last year. The Supreme Court has issued this interim opinion about immunity, that not only can you not prosecute a sitting president for official acts, but you can't use official acts to then form the basis of evidence in criminal matters. Trump believes that his statements and statements that were made to people who were a part of the administration and beyond, whether it be Hope Hicks or others, should not have been allowed to be entered into the evidence and therefore could have unduly tainted the jury's view of the case. Merchan is saying, however, the considerable, indeed extraordinary legal protections afforded the office of the chief executive is a factor that overrides all else in his sentencing. But remember, he's a president-elect, so a lot of that is not applied to him yet, and the judge wanted this done beforehand. This will be quite a slap on the wrist. I'm curious if the judge will in fact address the contempt or even the statements Trump has made about the judge and his family as well.
All right, Laura Coates, thank you very much. With me now, CNN anchor and chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins and CNN senior legal analyst and
this right here is what the media wants. The media wants him to be convicted and to go into the White House as a convicted felon. This is what the media wants, okay? Look at her smiling. They're happy, like, yes, we finally did it. Look at CNN. They're so happy, glad, joyous that they finally got a sentencing for the 45th and now the 47th president-elect of the United States, Donald J. Trump. Well, this is what the judge wanted as well. He wanted to be the first person to convict a sitting president or a duly elected president of the United States.
Former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Ellie, let me go to you first. What's your reaction to what we've been hearing so far?
Well, it's pretty orderly, all things said. Donald Trump seems to have gone on a little bit of a tirade, but nothing unpredictable, nothing different from what he said before. One thing that I think is interesting is there's been no talk whatsoever, except from Donald Trump, about the actual conduct that Donald Trump was tried and found guilty for. For a while, the DA was trying to say this conduct of hiding the hush money payments.
Okay,
there we go. So
right
that's the official moment of the sentence. Donald Trump has now been sentenced to an unconditional discharge.
What does that mean?
That means that it is now official, that Donald Trump has been convicted of a felony. There's two parts of that equation, the conviction, and now we have part two, the sentence. So that is a moment. We now have Donald Trump. I guess you can technically, if you would like to call him a convicted felon, that is a label that now technically applies. But of course, he does have his appeal rights. But again, the focus has been, okay, lawyers are packing up. So
yeah, Judge Merchan is off the bench. So it happened that quickly.
In a lot of ways, not that different from any other sentencing. It took 38 minutes. That's about average for a sentencing in state court. But the focus has largely been on Trump's out-of-court conduct.
Yeah, Caitlin, what do you think? You've been watching all this.
Well, the most interesting statement from Judge Merchan just a few moments ago before he left the bench was acknowledging Trump's election win. He was saying, ordinary citizens don't get these kind of legal protections. It's the office of the presidency that is bestowing these to the office holder. And he said, it is the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, essentially acknowledging that, yes, because Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated in a few days, that is changing the sentencing here. I mean, if this had happened in July before he had actually won, you could see, that was way before he was afforded those protections and how different that was.
And Caitlin, you were reporting that Donald Trump did not have to appear in court this morning. He did this over video.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed from attending this trial when it was going on is that the way that the Trump team has framed Justice Merchan and how he acts here is so different than what I personally witnessed and reported on
of course,
which is that the judge actually goes out of his way and bends over backwards a lot of the time to accommodate Donald Trump. He was never bothered when Trump was sitting there, hitting his attorneys, passing them notes, talking sometimes out loud during the hearing. And instead, he allowed him to appear virtually from from Mar-a-Lago with his attorney there, Todd Blanche. Another attorney, I believe, was in court.
Is that a photo? We're looking at it right now.
Yeah, and so see the two of them appearing side by side. He was not there actually in the courtroom, which, as Ellie would note, I would assume is pretty unusual for
almost
not being
unheard
present.
of. Almost unheard of.
Ellie, what do you make of these images that we're looking at right here?
Well, they got fully dressed up.
This is historic.
Right, and look, this is a criminal defendant at his sentencing sitting in front of the American flag. I mean, I promise you that's never happened before in American history. But as Caitlin said, the judge made clear that you are only getting this sentence. The DA said the same thing because of your status as president. And look, in our legal and constitutional system, the president just is different. One thing we will never know, I wish we could somehow figure this out, what would the sentence have been if Trump had not won the election, right? I mean, there certainly would have been some sort of probation. Judge Merchan, would he have sentenced to prison? It's one of those hypotheticals we'll never know.
Because Laura Coates was saying just a few moments ago that this was essentially a slap on the wrist. This is actually less than that.
I was going to say, at least you feel a slap on the wrist. I'm not sure that this is even that. But again, it does make the conviction official.
Caitlin, I mean, if we could show that image one more time of Trump with his attorney there in that monitor, that is something else. And at one point, I think we just saw an image of him sort of pointing his finger, there it is, at the camera. I guess we don't know what is going on there, but we can guess.
Well, and also, Jim, just to think of it in the full circle moment of, we were covering the White House when this story was kind of first unraveling and being reported publicly, and we learned about the hush money payments and learned about the cover-up and watched Rudy Giuliani go on TV and talk about this. That was so interesting, and to see how that has developed from this moment to now, Trump appearing virtually for this sentencing, which, his attorneys and people in his orbit, his top advisors, had argued this is pretty much a best case scenario from where we were when this guilty verdict came down last May. A lot of options, as Ellie noted, had he lost, could have happened here. And so they were arguing essentially take this and go with it. But Trump himself doesn't want to be sworn in as a convicted felon. He now will be as a result of this. But I think to Judge Merchan's point, I mean, the election happened months after Trump was convicted. The American people had enough time to take this guilty verdict in, to digest it, and still, it didn't bother them enough to not reelect him. And that's his argument.
People have said that Donald Trump has just completed the greatest political comeback ever in our history. Maybe I'm not a political expert, but legally, think back a year and a half ago. I don't believe there's ever been another human being in the history of this country who's been under 4 separate simultaneous indictments in 4 separate jurisdictions. He was looking at 4 trials. Any one of them could have resulted in his imprisonment. Now here we are. This is it. An unconditional discharge on one of the cases. Completely impossible to have predicted this a year and a half ago.
Yeah, he pulled off this incredible political comeback, but at the same time, he is going to be making history. He is going to be entering the White House as a convicted felon until he's able to deal with this in the courts as that legal process continues. Is that essentially it?
That is correct. He is a convicted felon now. He will be 10 days from now when he takes the oath of office. But again, important to keep in mind, like all defendants, he has his appeal rights. That'll take many, many months. So it could happen that...
And he could go from the White House to the courthouse or appear virtually from the White House as this appellate process
this is what they want.
Yeah, so defendants don't usually physically appear for their appeals. It's done on paper with briefs. And then when there's oral arguments, his lawyers, Caitlin raises a good question, who's even going to do this? Because his whole team is coming with him to the administration. He'll find someone. But the lawyers do the oral argument. Defendants usually do not attend those arguments. But, 6-8 months from now, maybe he'll choose to.
We'll see.
This is what the media wants. They're so glad he has been sentenced. Okay? But it's like what? Sentenced to what? Literally nothing. He's been sentenced to the White House. They just want him to have that record saying this was the first convicted felon to become the United States president. This is all they want, and they got it. Shame, shame, shame.
And we have just heard that apparently Trump is finished speaking and that Merchan, Judge Merchan, is starting the sentencing right now.
And in wrapping up, Trump said that this is a great embarrassment to the state of New York. And then Jonathan pointed out this idea that Michael Colangelo left his position as a deputy or assistant attorney general at the Department of Justice to take on the mantle of a humble state prosecutor for this case. I mean, that was something that a lot of people said, well, that draws a direct connection between what's going on in New York City and what's going on at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. What do you think?
Well, it is interesting that in these final remarks, Trump is opening up about many of these issues. He's raised some of these themes before, but he was also under a gag order, something that many of us felt was excessive. You had this acting New York justice in Manhattan effectively controlling the leading candidate for the presidency on a subject that was important to many voters. Many voters saw what Merchan did in his courtroom as raw lawfare and saw these types of cross-pollination that you just raised, John, as evidence of that. And I think that, in my view, that's the verdict that is going to be unassailable here. I don't think this case is likely to be upheld. I hope it will not be. But I think that the verdict on the New York court system is going to really stand the test of time. This was where the New York court system failed in a spectacular fashion, allowed people like Bragg, Attorney General James, and others to weaponize their system. It's going to take years for New York to regain a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of many citizens, including many business people who look at this and say, but for the grace of God, go I. But the one thing that I think that Trump can take some solace in is that he can now appeal this case in whole. And as Andy was talking about, there are some just glaring, in my views, reversible errors. I agree with Andy that the one that takes my breath away, even beyond the fact that I think this is a made-up criminal case with a made-up crime, is that the judge did not require the jury to unanimously agree on what happened. That is, in order to zap that dead misdemeanor into life, they needed this secondary crime. What was Trump trying to hide? What was he trying to achieve? Merchan just said, come up with anything. It doesn't matter. You just choose on this menu, and you don't even have to tell us what you actually think happened in this case. That should be outrageous to everyone, including critics. And, I have to give credit to, over at CNN, their senior analyst said this was unprecedented, absurd. The New York senator from New Jersey recently used stronger language to condemn this case. Those are voices from the left that I want to give credit to. But where the silence, the deafening silence, is coming from the New York legal system itself. And that's where I think many of us are rather shocked that we ever got to this point to see this sentence come down in a case that should never have been brought.
Andy, Todd Blanche is the defense attorney with Trump today. He's going to be starting at the Justice Department on January 20th.
Right.
That is not a Senate-confirmed position.
The media got what they wanted. Yes, they definitely got what they wanted. They wanted this man to be a convicted felon walking into the White House. That's all they wanted. And that judge right there, he wanted to be the person that did the job. And he did it. Okay. The media won. Okay. Now Trump is going into the White House as a convicted felon. This man was supposed to be thinking about how to secure the border, how to make sure foreign policy is Gucci again, is great again. Okay. How to make sure that the economy comes back, bounce back. Okay. How to make sure that everybody in the United States has some sort of money back in their pockets. This is all this man is trying to do. And guess what they're doing? Trying to make him think about the fact that he has to appeal. He has to go through this whole process again. And this is going to take months and months and months. All right. And somebody said in the chat, it is just a slap on the wrist. What do you mean it's just a slap on the wrist? His name has been tainted and he's going into the White House as the first ever convicted felon. So, how is this a slap on the wrist? He is going to go down in history as the first ever worldwide United States president to be a convicted felon. So, when somebody says this is just a slap on the wrist, no, this is not a slap on the wrist. This is going to go down in history. However, the people don't even care about people talking about he's a convicted felon. They've been calling him a convicted felon before he was actually sentenced today. The media has been. They've been calling this man a convicted felon. So this isn't like a new thing. However, it's like he doesn't want it, so they're gonna appeal again. So this right here is just a waste of time for America. Okay, this is a waste of time for America. Like, if you're saying the president of the United States has to go through this right here, what are we saying? What are we doing? This is a man that you elected to secure your border, to strengthen your military, to make sure that the foreign policy is great, to make sure that he brings down inflation, to bring down cost of goods, cost of food, cost of gas, to reduce taxes. But this is what he has to go through. This is what he has to go through after 76 million plus people voted for him. This is what he has to go through. And you still expect him to secure the border. You expect him to make sure the foreign policy is great again. You expect him to take you out of deals that is just not what the United States should be in. You expect him to bring back jobs. You expect him to bring down the cost of gas. You expect him to increase energy, to bring down the cost of energy 50% in the first year. You expect him to sign the bill that says no tax on tips. You expect him to sign the bill that says no tax on overtime. You expect all these great things from him, yet you want to convict him. He is a convicted felon, y'all. But then you want him to bring down taxes. You want him to bring down the cost of goods, the cost of gas. You want all these things from him, but yet you want to convict him. It's like, can this man get a break? Can you just give this man a break, please? Oh, God.
Right?
No, it is.
Oh, it is. So he'll have to be Senate confirmed. So he's probably not going to talk too much outside of this until then. But can you project a little bit ahead? I mean, if they're saying what they're saying about the New York system and also about the overall court proceedings in America and people not having any confidence, what can or should or do you anticipate Todd Blanche, Pam Bondi might do there?
Well, I think the first flashpoint, Dana, and Trey and I talked about this before we came in, is probably the Mangione case, the terrible homicide case that we had in New York. Very interesting, not to get too much into the weeds about this, but in most of the country, there's no problem if the state prosecutes someone having a separate federal prosecution because of what we call dual sovereignty. But in New York, it doesn't work that way. In New York, they have what they call equitable double jeopardy in the state constitution. And as a practical matter, what that always meant when I was a federal prosecutor here, we could always win the turf battles. Because if we go first, the state can't go at all. They're basically jeopardied out, as we used to say. So I thought it was interesting that the Biden Justice Department evidently made a deal with Bragg that New York could go first on Mangione, and then the feds would go. I would be very surprised if the Trump Justice Department feels like they have to honor that deal.
All right. Anything on that, Trey?
I hate to use the word collusion, but Pam Bondi, Todd Blanche, Kash Patel, if they're all confirmed, will find out whether or not there was collusion between Merrick Garland and Alvin Bragg to bring this case in state court. They'll have all the paperwork, all the paper trail. So if there was collusion, we'll know about it in about 3 months.
All right, so more notes from inside the court from our Kerry Urban. Judge Merchan, in his preamble to announcing the sentence, says the Trump trial was no different than all of the other criminal trials in the building. Merchan attempting to create equivalency between Trump and ordinary criminals while acknowledging the fact that he won the presidency and how it is, in fact, different. Andy, you want to tackle that one, that the Trump case is no different than any other case that comes into his courtroom?
Well, I think the Trump case is different because the defendant is in the courtroom. In Alvin Bragg's New York, that doesn't often happen. We have criminals who commit very serious crimes here who never actually get charged and never find their way into the courtroom. When they get into one of Alvin Bragg's courtrooms, if they start out with a felony, if it gets down to a misdemeanor, that's actually lucky for the public. Very often, there's not even misdemeanor dispositions. I just think it's like living in an alternative universe, listening to these guys. If you actually spend time in New York, if you grew up in New York like I did, and you saw the plummeting of crime from the 90s for the 25 years after that, which was accomplished by actual prosecution of cases. And then you have a district attorney who comes in with what he called a day one memo, which basically said there's a new regime in town and what we're going to try as prosecutors is non-prosecution. And that's pretty much what criminals get in New York unless their name is Donald Trump.
Wanted to ask you about something, Trey, which is the amount of taxpayer dollars that has gone forward in this prosecution, plus all of the legal costs for the defendant, who is the president-elect.
And all the other cases that were not able to be brought to trial because they wasted time on this one. All the sex assault victims, the robbery victims. Court time is precious. It is a precious resource. To waste this time on a case where even the prosecution agrees you should not spend a minute. So if Juan Bershon says this case was not handled any differently, that just tells me there are lots of bad trials going on in New York. One other point on appeal, when I was in the courtroom, the expert, Trump's expert, was not even allowed to testify. And I literally, Dana, heard the same question asked from the defense and the prosecution with different rulings. So if Juan Bershon says that he did this like he did every other case, then he's a bad judge in every other case because the rulings were different depending on who did the objecting.
Yeah. So let me put this question to you, Professor Turley, because there seems to be a consensus among the three of you that there is plenty of potentially reversible error that was committed during the Trump trial.
This right here just sets the whole administration behind. It sets them back. But I don't think Trump would be focusing on this right here. I don't think he should be focusing on this right here. But I don't think, like I said, I don't think he should be focusing on this. He should just go ahead and make America great again like he promised, because this is just, I mean, the people understand, okay? The people who voted for him, the 76 million plus who voted for Trump, they don't care about this. Really, they don't care about this. But, you know, Trump doesn't want to have this on his record. So will any sensible person who feels like they are innocent. They don't want to be convicted of something they didn't do. So, you know, it's just logical for him to want to fight it. I get it. However, it's like there's so much to do, Trump. There's so much to do. There's way too much to do. But Trump has always been a person that can actually multitask. So, I guess he can do both, but there's way too much to do. A lot of people are trying to test the United States. So he has to focus on making sure the United States economy is great and strong and healthy. But it is what it is.
Yet in the New York court system, Trump has pretty much gotten locked out of all of his petitions to either have the case thrown out or delayed or sentencing delayed or whatever. What makes you believe that he could prevail on appeal given his track record with the New York court system, which a lot of people believe is politically allied against him?
Well, very few people have high expectations at this point for the New York legal system, and it hurts me to say that because I've had a great respect for that system for many years, as has many others. But there's also a problem in these interlocutory appeals. They kept on taking these three-point shots mid-trial, shortly after the verdict. Those are always disfavored. And so the chances of prevailing are not high. You have a better chance once the case itself has been appealed, but also eventually this will go to the Supreme Court. And the key is escaping the vortex that is the New York court system.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And
with that being said, everybody has an opinion when it comes to this right here.
Would your client like to be heard?
All right, so this is a courtroom audio, and we're gonna listen to it. This right here is just a bunch of BS, but it happened. This judge just wanted to be the person that sentenced the president of the United States. He wanted to be the person. Now Kash Patel is gonna get confirmed, and then is gonna investigate the judge, and then they're gonna go back and forth, and then the media is gonna like milk all of this stuff instead of us focusing on greatness for the next 4 years? Why is this world like this? Why can't we just focus on greatness, stay tuned, be on one accord, and just strive for greatness? We want to do all of this stuff. Like, come on.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they said, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work, I didn't call them electrical work, I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one, and these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly, but they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that. Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington. But he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with the city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
Let's impose sentence, please.
Donald Trump, you are before the court for sentence following your conviction by trial to 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Before being sentenced, the court will allow you, your attorney, and the assistant district attorney an opportunity to address the court with any matters relevant to sentencing. For the people.
Thank you. Judge, where's the preferred place for me to stand?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
The defendant in this case, as you know, stands convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, all Class E felonies. Each carries a range of authorized sentencing options for as much as 1 1/3 to 4 years in state prison to a variety of non-incarceratory sentences. In this court's January 3rd decision on the defendant's Clayton motion, Your Honor indicated an inclination to impose an unconditional discharge. Under all the circumstances of this case, its unique posture and the defendant's status as president-elect, the people recommend a sentence of an unconditional discharge. In finding the defendant guilty in this case, the jury necessarily found unanimously that the defendant falsified 34 separate entries in his business records with the intent to defraud, which included an intent to commit or conceal a conspiracy to promote his own election by unlawful means. Having presided over the trial, Your Honor is very familiar with the conduct, its seriousness, and the overwhelming evidence to support the jury's verdict. I'm certainly not going to rehash that now. In last week's decision on January 3rd, this court referred to the gravamen of the defendant's conduct, his criminal conduct in this case, as constituting, quote, premeditated and continuous deception. The verdict was delivered by a jury that was carefully chosen using an extensive questionnaire based on suggestions from both parties and after thorough questioning of the prospective jurors by both sides. The verdict in this case was unanimous and decisive, and it must be respected. As this court has observed, quote, the sanctity of a jury verdict and the deference that must be accorded to it is a bedrock principle in our nation's jurisprudence. The defendant's conduct before, during, and after this trial also merits consideration. Instead of preserving, protecting, and defending our constitutionally established system of criminal justice, the defendant, the once and future President of the United States, has engaged in a coordinated campaign to undermine its legitimacy. Far from expressing any kind of remorse for his criminal conduct, the defendant has purposefully bred disdain for our judicial institutions and the rule of law. And he's done this to serve his own ends and to encourage others to reject the jury verdict that he finds so distasteful. He has characterized these proceedings as corrupt, rigged, a witch hunt, or a sham too many times to tabulate. The defendant's rhetoric has only ratcheted up since this court's rulings on his motions to dismiss. He has been unrelenting in his unsubstantiated attacks upon this court and its family, individual prosecutors and their families, the witnesses, the grand jury, the trial jury, and the justice system as a whole. The defendant has not only been held in contempt by other jurists in other matters, but this court alone found the defendant in contempt for 10 distinct violations of the order restricting extrajudicial speech. In his legal filings, the defendant has used dangerous rhetoric in leveling accusations of intentionally unlawful and unconstitutional conduct on the part of this court and the prosecution. As this court has noted, the defendant's conduct, quote, constitutes a direct attack on the rule of law itself. Moreover, the defendant has publicly threatened to retaliate against the prosecutors who have sought to hold him accountable in this and other matters, and the courts who have endeavored to fairly and faithfully adjudicate these matters. Such threats are designed to have a chilling effect, to intimidate those who have the responsibility to enforce our laws, in the hopes that they will ignore the defendant's transgressions because they fear that he is simply too powerful to be subjected to the same rule of law as the rest of us. In his 2024 end-of-year report, United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts warned of the dangers of such conduct. Quote, public officials, too, regrettably, have engaged in recent attempts to intimidate judges. For example, suggesting political bias in the judge's adverse rulings without credible basis for such allegations, end quote. Chief Justice Roberts continued, quote, attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. Public officials certainly have a right to criticize the work of the judiciary, but they should be mindful that intemperance in their statements when it comes to judges may prompt dangerous reactions by others. Chief Justice Roberts also spoke of the dangers of disinformation, which are, quote, magnified by social media, which provides a ready channel to instantly spread rumor and false information. Put simply, this defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system and has placed officers of the court in harm's way. In the probation report, which we just received this morning, the author, having interviewed the defendant, noted that the defendant sees himself as above the law and won't accept responsibility for his actions. And that's certainly consistent with everything else that we've seen. Now, in a typical case, both the offense conduct and these other exacerbating factors would impact the appropriate sentence. But in this case, we must be respectful of the office of the presidency and mindful of the fact that the defendant will be inaugurated as president in 10 days. Any undischarged portion of a sentence has the potential to interfere with the defendant's performance of the duties of his office. As a practical matter, the most sensible sentence prior to his inauguration is an unconditional discharge. The court has expressed an inclination to do exactly that because, in the court's words, quote, the most viable solution to ensure finality and allow defendant to pursue his appellate options is to proceed to sentence. Now, as you know, in New York, a conditional discharge is authorized by penal law, quote, if the court, having regard to the nature and circumstances of the offense and to the history, character, and condition of the defendant, is of the opinion that neither the public interest nor the ends of justice would be served by a sentence of imprisonment, and that probation supervision is not appropriate. An unconditional discharge is authorized if a conditional discharge is authorized and, quote, if the court is of the opinion that no proper purpose would be served by imposing any condition upon the defendant's release. Because these crimes are felonies, the court must set forth in the record the reasons for its action. The American public has the right to a presidency unencumbered by pending court proceedings or ongoing sentence-related obligations. But imposing this sentence ensures that finality. Sentencing the defendant permits this court to enter judgment, to cement the defendant's status as a convicted felon while he pursues whatever appeals he intends to pursue. And it gives full effect and respect to the jury's verdict while preserving the defendant's ability to govern. People therefore recommend that this court impose a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I very much disagree with much of what the government just said about this case, about the legitimacy of what happened in this courtroom during the trial, and about President Trump's conduct fighting this case from before it was indicted, to while it was indicted, through the jury's verdict, and even to this day. What the government just said presupposes something that we disagree with very much, which was that this was an appropriate case to be brought. It was not. This case, without a doubt, knowing everything we know about the timing of the investigation, the fact that multiple prosecutors looked at the fact of this case, including prosecutors within the district attorney's office in New York County, and made a decision not to bring charges. As the court knows, shortly after President Trump announced his intention to run for re-election, this case was started for what amounted to a third time, which brings us ultimately to where we are today. A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that, and as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many, many, many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also on the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States. And certainly we're here for the court to sentence President Trump to an unconditional discharge. And for that, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day for President Trump and his family and friends. But it's also, in counsel's view, a sad day for this country, because this was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a district attorney who promised that he would go after President Trump if elected, and felt like he had to go through with that promise. And so that's sad. And I hope, and I know that President Trump shares this view, that this will never happen again in this country. And so we certainly understand where we are today. We very much intend on pursuing an appeal of this verdict and what happened during this investigation. And we certainly believe that the only appropriate sentence, if one's to be imposed at all, which we very much believe it shouldn't be, and that the case should be dismissed, is a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This was a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they say, it was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them any. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt, and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far in swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington. But he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. That's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to exclaim that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, you appear before this court today to conclude this criminal proceeding by the imposition of sentence. Although I have taken the unusual step of informing you in advance of my inclinations, before imposing sentence, I believe it is important for you, as well as those observing these proceedings, to understand my reasoning for the sentence I am about to impose. The imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. Our legislature sets the parameters for an authorized sentence, but it is a judge that must decide what constitutes a just conclusion to a verdict of guilty. A court is vested with broad discretion in determining what sources or evidence it may consider to arrive at an appropriate sentence. In doing so, the court must consider the facts of the case along with any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. In my time on the bench, I've been called upon to grapple with this weighty responsibility for countless defendants who have been found guilty after trial for an assortment of offenses, ranging from nonviolent Class E felonies to the most heinous of crimes, including homicides, sex trafficking, and child sexual abuse. The task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration, whether the sentence be an unconditional discharge or incarceration of 25 years to life. However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. Indeed, it can be viewed fairly that this has been a truly extraordinary case. There was unprecedented media attention, public interest, and heightened security involving various agencies. And yet, the trial was a bit of a paradox because once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial itself was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than the other 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same exact time. Jury selection was conducted, the same rules of evidence were followed, opening statements were made, witnesses called and cross-examined, evidence presented, summations delivered. The same burden of proof was applied, and a jury made up of ordinary citizens delivered a verdict. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure and guided by the law. Of course, part of what made it feel somewhat ordinary was the outstanding work, preparation, and professionalism of the clerks, court officers, court reporters, security personnel, and the entire staff of this building who did their jobs as they would with any other criminal trial. So while one can argue that the trial itself was in many respects somewhat ordinary, the same cannot be said about the circumstances surrounding this sentencing. And that is because of the office you once occupied and which you will soon occupy again. To be sure, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. The legal protections, especially within the context of a criminal prosecution, afforded to the office of the President have been laid out by our founders, the Constitution, and most recently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court in the matter of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1st, 2024. As with every other defendant in your position, it is my obligation to consider any and all aggravating and mitigating factors to inform my decision. Some of those aggravating factors have already been articulated in my Sandoval ruling at the start of this trial and by my recent written decisions on December 16th and January 3rd. Thus, they need not be repeated at this time. However, the considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the office of the Chief Executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, the protections afforded the office of the President are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate, which pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce, that Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No, ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the office of the President that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause and presidential immunity. It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence. After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge. which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree. Therefore, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts. Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's an honor to have the press.
My mic was muted. Yeah, Lord.
And these are people that aren't timid. They're not afraid of the press. If you'd like to ask a couple of questions, you may. We had a very beautiful day celebrating a very nice man, a good man, great humanitarian, Jimmy Carter's funeral. And thought it was a beautiful service, and it went very well. And we had some very good victories today, as you probably heard. Go ahead, any questions?
President Trump, just a few minutes ago, the Supreme Court ruled that they are not going to slow down the sentencing. It's on for tomorrow. Now what?
Well, they called for an appeal, and as you know, they acknowledged what the judge said about no penalty, and there's no penalty. But we're going to appeal anyway, just psychologically, because frankly, it's a disgrace. It's a judge that shouldn't have been on the case. He's a highly conflicted judge, and they called for an appeal. So I read it, and I thought it was a fair decision, actually. So I'll do my little thing tomorrow. They can have fun with their political opponent. As you know, I'm under a gag order from a judge. This is the first. This was an attack of a political opponent. And if you take a look at it, I'm not supposed to be talking about it, so I won't. I'm the first president and probably one of the first candidates in history that's under attack with a gag order, where I'm not allowed to speak about something. And they ought to find out what that's all about. And this is a long way from finished. And I respect the court's opinion. I think it was actually a very good opinion for us because you saw what they said. But they invited the appeal, and the appeal is on the bigger issue. So we'll see how it all works out. I think it's going to work out well. We beat Jack Smith. He's back, I hope, at The Hague, but I don't think he should be there either. He puts people in very bad positions, like giving people death penalties. I will tell you, Jack, he is a disgrace. We won all of those cases. We won most of the other cases, or they're limping along. We've had a lot of lawfare. These are all people that understand what's going on here very badly. This was an attack on the Republican Party. This was an attack on the Republican candidate who just won an election by record numbers, the highest number of Republican votes by far ever gotten. And we won all swing states, 7 swing states. We won the popular vote by millions of people. And that was the real vote. And I said it a long time ago, the real vote is that. And they tried to stop that from happening. They tried to stop this election from happening, or to bloody somebody up so badly they couldn't win, and the people got it. And again, we won by the largest number. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. It was conclusive. It was a massive, they say, the most consequential election in 129 years. And these people, the people know everything that you're asking. They've been studying this for 2 years as it went along. And hopefully it'll never happen again, an attack on a political opponent. So Peter will be appealing the decision. They're asking for an appeal, and that's on the fact, on what's going to happen, much more importantly than tomorrow.
Off the top, you mentioned the Carter funeral today. What were you talking to Barack Obama about?
It did look very friendly, I must say.
I thought you guys hated each other.
I didn't realize it, how friendly it looked. I saw it on your wonderful network just a little while ago before I came in, and I said, boy, they look like two people that like each other. And we probably do. We have little different philosophies, right? But we probably do. I don't know, we just got along. But I got along with just about everybody on that. We met backstage, as you know, before we went on. And I thought it was a beautiful service, but we all got along very well, which is good.
In California, what specifically do you think Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass could have done differently to prepare for this $50 billion fire?
And, you know, we have great governors in this room, and if you look at the way their states, I think I can say without exception, anybody doing poorly in here? I mean, without exception, we have great governors here that have done a great job with their states. And I don't think, and you'll probably, if there's a weak link, you're going to find it, and you're going to be asking the next question to that person. Gavin Newsom had an opportunity to have millions of gallons a week, a day, millions and millions of gallons come down from the north. And I was able to get him federal approval from that, from the Department of Commerce of all departments. I didn't realize it would go through Commerce. I would have thought environmental, but it goes through Commerce. I got all of the approvals, and he said, I don't want to sign it. I don't want the water. We don't need the water. I said, you need the water. Your reservoirs are empty, the whole place. You need the water. That was 5 years ago. And I had it all done. The work was all done. We sent it to him. He refused to sign it. And if you notice yesterday, the hydrants were empty. They didn't have any water, many of them. They said 20%, but now I just heard 50%, and now none of them have water, and that fire's still raging. He turned that down. I was going to give him unlimited water. It would come down, it really comes down from the north, way up north, including parts of Canada. It's so much water that they wouldn't know what to do with. Just the opposite would have happened. And that's the reason that this happened. He wouldn't do what we wanted, and we're going to force that upon him now, but it's very late, because I think it's one of the great catastrophes in the history of our nation. This is not just in Los Angeles. I've never seen anything like that, devastation. And we're talking about homes that cost $200, $300, $400 million. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. People that, and very influential people worldwide. I don't know that they ever go back either, because you know, they weren't happy with California. They weren't happy with Gavin Newsom. They weren't happy with their whole lifestyle there, with the crime being out of control, all the other problems. They were not happy. And it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not they're going to build, or whether somebody else is going to build and build a much lesser home. These were the most expensive homes. Outside of Palm Beach County, I see a list, outside of Palm Beach, these were the most expensive homes anywhere in the world. And I don't think I think a lot of them are just not going to go back and build it. Plus, they don't want to be part of a construction site. They don't want to, they're building a home, another one's building, they're building in front of them, behind them, alongside of them. So I think it's a tragedy. I think it's an incredible tragedy. It's also a tragedy for a tax base. And the governors know exactly what I'm talking, and I'd like to hear anybody talk about that. But if you're the governor of a state and you lost thousands of very rich people that were paying a lot of taxes and weren't happy about it, and weren't happy about what's happened to California, which has all the advantages of greatness, but they've had horrible politicians. I think that Gavin is largely incompetent, and I think the mayor is largely incompetent, and probably both of them are just stone cold incompetent. What they've done is terrible. Would anybody have a comment on that? Because when you talk about losing the tax base, you're losing a lot of, you're going to lose a lot of those people permanently. Those people pay billions of dollars in taxes. Governor, what about you?
We got some great property in Louisiana.
They'll be moving to a lot of your states. They'll be moving to Florida, I can tell you, I know that. But they're going to be moving to, you're going to pick up a lot, Texas. So it's a rough situation. I've never seen, I think it's one of the great catastrophes in the history of our country. Not even believable.
President Biden's term, almost over. Before he goes, there's talk that he might trade a Gitmo al-Qaeda detainee, Mohammed Rahim, for 3 American hostages held by the Taliban. Should he do that?
Well, I haven't looked at it. I will be looking at it. They're showing me tomorrow morning. They're showing me that there's a trade on. And trades, I have not been in favor of the trades they've made, but I'll be taking a look tomorrow. We'll announce something tomorrow.
Don Jr. and some of your team just got back from Greenland. What's the price tag?
Well, maybe no price tag. You know, look, we're going to have to see what happens, because Denmark, we need this for national security. We need Greenland very badly. You look at the Russian ships, the China ships, they're all over the place. They're, you know, surrounding. Now, they have for a long time. That's a lane. but we need that for national security. So I don't know that Denmark has any right, title, and interest, so we're going to find that. But I can tell you, you saw the clips that were released. The people of Greenland would love to become a state of the United States of America. We were greeted with tremendous love and affection and respect. The people would like to be a part of the United States. Now, Denmark maybe doesn't like it, but then we can't be too happy with Denmark, and maybe things have to happen with respect to Denmark having to do with tariffs. Because they have to do this, I think, for the free world. We need that to protect the free world. It's very important, and getting more important every year.
When you were with all the Republican senators yesterday in Washington, which of your nominees do they think are going to have the hardest time getting confirmed?
So we had a great meeting with almost every senator, Republican senator, and I would say that first it was a love fest. This is a love fest too, I believe. I'll let you know in about an hour. But this is pretty much a love fest. I mean, the governors aren't exactly chopped liver, right? This is a group of people that have done a phenomenal job, and especially when you see what's going on in Los Angeles and all. You look at the way they've run their states, it's incredible. I talk about it all the time, the top 25 states, and I don't believe we have any in the list of crime. So every one of them is a Democrat-run state. We want to get along with the Democrats. I'm trying to be nice. We're going into a new term. It's going to be a great time for, I'm going to call it the golden age. I believe we have a chance at the golden age of America, but I have to tell you, you look at the crime, it's all on the shoulders of Democrats and the way they run their states. And if these people ran those states, same people, same everything, but you put these people in those states, you wouldn't have crime like that at all.
We've been watching over the last couple weeks, a lot of CEOs, including some who censored you 4 years ago, have been coming down here basically to kiss the ring. Did they change or did you change?
Well, maybe we all changed. I think they've gained a lot of respect. I think they looked at the mandate that we got. As you know, we won the popular vote, as I said. We won all 7 swing states. They said, well, if Trump would win, you know, I had to win 3 because I had a lot of early voting going on, and we had to win 3, and we won all 7. And we won them by a lot. We didn't win them by a little. We won them by a lot. And we won the popular vote by a lot. I think that had an effect. I also think it's like, let's get something done. You look at what happened with Facebook today and yesterday, what they announced. That was a big concession from them. I mean, they went from I call them the unlocked boxes. They call them lock boxes. I call them the unlocked boxes because they seem to be unlocked a lot of times. But you went from the unlocked boxes into a statement yesterday that's really talking about free speech. What a difference that is. And so we appreciate that. But I think they've gained a lot of respect. We've had everybody. Jeff Bezos came, Bill Gates came, Mark Zuckerberg came. Many of them came numerous times. The bankers have all come. Everybody's coming. I haven't had anybody saying anything bad about me. I'm not used to it. But a lot of it's respect. I think they respect the Republican Party. The Republican Party has become a much bigger party. It's become a party for the worker. You know, if you look at all of the union votes that I got, and when I say I, it's really all of us together because it's a whole thing. But we won the Teamsters. We did great with the auto workers. We did, you know, all heavily union and non-union states. We won by a lot. Florida is an example. We won by millions of votes, the highest vote ever gotten. And so it's been a great period of time.
A ton of world leaders have called you as well. We understand still no call with Putin. Is that a day one or week one call that you want to have?
He wants to meet, and we're setting it up. President Xi, we've had a lot of communication, and we have a lot of meetings set up with a lot of people. Some have come, but I'd rather wait till after the 20th.
And when you say meet with Putin or meet with Xi, do you guys want to have some kind of a summit, or are they going to come here?
To be determined, but President Putin wants to meet. He's said that even publicly. And we have to get that war over with. That's a bloody mess. Soldiers are being killed by the millions. I looked at some very graphic pictures yesterday. The soldiers that are being killed, you know, it's a flat field. The only thing that stops a bullet is a body. These are it's a very, very flat land. And the soldiers are fighting, and they are dying by the hundreds of thousands. and not to mention the towns and the cities which were, largely demolished. And there are a lot of people in the big surprise, and it's going to be a very unpleasant surprise, is how many people were killed in that war. It's much higher than the press is reporting. When a building comes down, these are big buildings, they're 2 and 3 blocks long, different kind of construction. They're long and not that tall in many cases, but they're 20 stories. But when a building like that comes down and they say nobody was injured, no, a lot of people were killed. I think the numbers are going to be much higher. And that's a war that would have never happened if I were president, and it's a war that I'm going to try really to stop as quickly as I can. The number of people dying on a daily basis, and I get the reports every single day, and largely soldiers at this point, but the number of people, both Russia and Ukraine, it's staggering.
When you threatened tariffs on Canada a couple weeks ago, Justin Trudeau rushed down here. He wanted to make nice. Now he's on the way out. Is that what you wanted?
I didn't think he was going to quit. He probably saw the numbers. Look, I call him Governor Trudeau because they should be the 51st state, really. It would make a great state. And the people of Canada like it. They pay lower taxes. They have virtually no military. They have a very small military. They pay less than 1%. They're about the lowest payer in NATO. They're supposed to pay much more. They haven't been paying. They have a lot of problems. And I was with Wayne Gretzky. I said, Wayne, would you like to be the governor of Canada? I can't imagine anybody doing any better than Wayne. Wayne was not too interested, but I think he probably would have liked statehood. He's a friend of mine. He's a great guy. He's the great one. We call him the great one, right? He's a great hockey player. But I will say this. I think that there's, it was stated pretty strongly a couple of weeks ago about Canada, and people laughed, and now they're all saying, well, it's very interesting. And I say from the standpoint of the United States, we're subsidizing Canada $200 and $250 billion a year. We have massive deficits. They've taken about 20% of our car business. I'd rather do it here. We could put tariffs on that. We don't have tariffs on them yet, but that will happen. But they've taken about 20% of our car business. I'd rather have it done in Detroit or have it done in South Carolina or any other state that does cars, and we have a lot of them. We don't need Canada for that. We don't need Canada for lumber because we have big forests that we have, not utilized. In some cases, they're protected, which I can take that protection off. And you take down a tree and you grow a better tree. And that's, pretty common. But we don't need anything. We don't need their fuel. We don't need their energy. We don't need their oil and gas. We don't need anything that they have. And I said to Trudeau, I said, why are we subsidizing you $200 and $250 billion a year? He said, I really don't know. And I said, well, I don't know either. I said, what would happen to Canada if we didn't? He said Canada would be obliterated if that happened. I said, then Canada should be a 51st state. That's where we are now.
A story that kind of disappeared very suddenly. Do you have any idea whatever happened to the drones?
What happened to drones?
Well, you had said that you thought the government knew what was happening with these drones over New Jersey. There were some by Bedminster.
I don't know. They're over Bedminster a lot. So
what happened?
I'm going to give you a report on drones about one day into the administration, because I think it's ridiculous that they're not telling you about what's going on with the drones. And it's not only with me. Glenn was telling me today that in Virginia they have drones all over the place too, and nobody's reporting it. I don't know why they're not. Do you want to say something about that?
Just one quick comment, which is we are home to the largest naval base in the world in Quantico, and we house a lot of the SEAL teams and have a huge national security infrastructure. And now for 2 years running, we have had drone incursion over secure airspace, and we still don't know why. And I think that's absolutely unacceptable. And I think President Trump and the new leadership coming in, I think will work diligently to understand who's behind this and what we do in order to stop the digital surveillance of all of our secure infrastructure.
Is it dangerous?
Well, I can tell you this. While we were dealing with a terrorist attack in New Orleans, we had drones being thrown over our nuclear reactors in Louisiana. And we brought that attention to the FAA. We've been asking the FAA to give these states the ability to mitigate these drones. And it's sitting on some bureaucrat's desk. And that's real.
Nobody knows. They don't want to talk about it.
Go ahead, Governor, you were going to say?
I was just going to say we have drones in Wyoming flying over our infrastructure as well. And it's incredibly frustrating that we not only have no way of knowing what it is, but nobody knows how to deal with them.
They don't want to talk about it, and nobody knows why. They don't want to talk about it. That could be us sending drones. I hope that's the case, us doing it and doing research, and maybe they don't want to talk about it from that standpoint. I hope it's not an enemy, but we're going to find out on the 21st, the day after. You have to give me a little time for the inauguration, but shortly thereafter, we'll give you a report on it. We'll tell you exactly what it is. They know, and it's very strange that they aren't talking about it. Peter, thank you very much. Does Biden do it? I mean, does he do this kind of a news conference?
This is my longest ever interview of a president.
Yeah, well, the longest ever before this was one question, and it would rush you out of the room. But we have nothing to hide. Thank you all very much.
And joining us right now is Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here, Jay.
Really appreciate it. Before I get into the funeral and before I get into what's going on with you back in your home country, I do want to ask, our country and the world really is watching these horrible fires in Los Angeles. Canada has a lot of experience with similar conflagrations. I know that you have been offering resources to the people of California and Los Angeles. What advice could you offer them?
Well, I think, unfortunately, over the past years, we've seen it get far worse, and we've seen wildfires increasingly encroaching on urban areas. And that's an interface fire where we're having to train up more local municipal firefighters to deal with wildfires in a way that we never had before. I've been back and forth texting with Governor Newsom. We've offered a tremendous amount of equipment that they're already accepting. There's expertise. There's things that we're having to do to deal with together as we, of course, respond to these fires, but also know that climate change means they're going to get steadily worse, and we have to keep stepping up on fighting climate change too.
But a lot of people out there might say, what does climate change have to do with this? Explain.
Well, when the summers get drier, when weather gets hotter, when weather patterns shift, communities that were built in a place that never saw fires are suddenly seeing fires much more frequently. There's a shift in everything that means even what we see now is going to just get worse and worse and worse over the coming decades if we're not serious about reducing our emissions and looking for ways to protect our future generations.
So you are here in Washington, D.C., even though you just stepped down as your party's leader and you will soon leave as prime minister. But why was it important for you to come here to Washington today to go to President Jimmy Carter's funeral?
Well, President Carter was a dear friend of my father's. They overlapped in their times of service. And Jimmy had been down at my father's funeral 25 years ago. He was always an inspiration to me in terms of compassionate, selfless leadership. And it was important for me, and I think it was important for the friendship between our countries, that the Prime Minister be there to represent.
President-elect Trump has been needling you a bit, calling you Governor Trudeau, talking about making Canada the 51st state. Did you have any interaction with him today?
No, not today. But that's not going to happen. Canadians are incredibly proud of being Canadian. One of the ways we define ourselves most easily is, well, we're not American. There is such a depth of pride that's not actually an issue. What I think is happening in this is President Trump, who's a very skillful negotiator, is getting people to be somewhat distracted by that conversation, to take away from the conversation around 25% tariffs on oil and gas and electricity and steel and aluminum and lumber and concrete, and everything the American consumers buy from Canada is suddenly going to get a lot more expensive if he moves forward on these tariffs. And that's something that I think we need to be focusing on a little bit more.
Did the re-election of Donald Trump and this more direct confrontation with Canada over this issue play any role at all in your decision to resign as leader of your party and prime minister?
No, on the contrary. What we were able to do during the first presidency of Mr. Trump's was work together in a very challenging situation to come out with a very strong win-win in Canada-U.S. relations with the renegotiation of the USMCA. It is a great deal for both of our countries. We've seen trade grow, we've seen opportunities grow, we've seen wealth grow in both of our countries for workers, for businesses. Working together concretely is something that we've been able to do in the past, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with him for the next 2 months while I'm still in office.
Let's talk about this potential 25% tariff from the United States on Canada. Economists say that will drive the Canadian economy into a recession, and the Canadian government is preparing retaliatory tariffs if these actually go through. Which do you think would be potentially the most effective against the United States? I don't want them, by the way, just as an American, I don't want these tariffs, but minerals, energy?
We don't want them either. We do not want to see tariffs on our side. We do not want to see tariffs on your side. It's bad for people who have, for generations, made things together and been successful together to actually start creating barriers between economies like ours. Like, we have so many resources in Canada, more than our market can support, so we export them to our closest friend who can rely on them. It is a win-win for us. We would definitely respond, as we did years ago when President Trump put tariffs on steel and aluminum. We responded by putting tariffs on Heinz ketchup, on playing cards, on bourbon, on Harley Davidsons, on things that would hurt American workers. But we don't want to do that because it drives up prices for Canadians and it harms our closest trading partner.
Is there nothing that Donald Trump is saying about trade status and relations right now where you think that he has a point? There's nothing you think that is unfair?
I mean, the conversation around tariffs started around border concerns. And what I spoke with him about in Mar-a-Lago was the fact that less than 1% of migrants into the United States, less than 1% of fentanyl into the United States comes from Canada. But there are absolutely more things we can do.
And you pledged $1 billion to enhance border security.
And we're strengthening. That's a clear win for President Trump that got us to do even more to reduce even further the minimal amounts coming in. On trade, there's more that we can do, but we should be focused on making sure that we're replacing Chinese lithium or Chinese germanium or Russian titanium into American productions by relying on your closest and friendliest trading partner in Canada. We can be a strong supplier of things that the U.S. needs to compete around the world because we can do it together.
You don't have to be part of it, though. You could be in the United States. You could be the 51st state. Okay, you don't have to be an ally. you can actually be the 51st state. You can actually be the 51st governor, except you are no longer the leader of your party. Okay.
That's the argument that I'm making.
So the struggle that you were having domestically, your disapproval rating had to do with, as I understand it, discontent with your government because of high inflation and the economy, and also because of immigration policies. Those are also issues that the left-wing party in this country has faced a lot of disapproval of and just lost an election over. It seems like voters in both of these, liberal democracies are sending a message to left-wing parties, liberal parties. We don't like how you're doing the economy when it comes to inflation. We don't like how you're doing immigration.
There are a lot of feelings involved. I mean, if you look at the actual numbers, inflation in Canada was lower, came down quicker. Our economy bounced back faster after the pandemic than anyone else's, including the United States. We're projected to grow faster than the United States and all other G7 countries next year. Our economy is doing very well. But when someone's paying $8 for a head of lettuce, it doesn't matter that you're doing better than they are in Spain or somewhere else. There's a sense that, okay, something's got to give. And that's where incumbents are in trouble everywhere everywhere around the world, not just in our two countries. The issue, though, is that in a time of crisis, responsible politics is around focusing on things that actually make a real difference in people's lives. We delivered $10 a day childcare. We're delivering a dental care program that provides free dental care to people who don't have coverage. We're moving forward on putting a price on pollution that puts more money in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians, of middle-class Canadians. These are policies that are not short-term. They're policies that will have a deep impact in the well-being of Canadians and of our country for years to come. Now, you can take those policies, like a childcare policy, and say, oh, see, that's just about wokeness and about, women's rights. Well, no, it's about getting more women into the workforce at a time where we need economic growth. That's what it is. But when you get I was going to say conflagration, but at least an intersection of both right-wing policy, right-wing attacks, and social media, you end up with a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and responsible governments have to stay focused on the policies that are making a difference, and that's what we've been doing.
I know you have to go. Before you go, I know you're not going to say who you want to succeed you, but whether it's Wayne Gretzky or Christina Friedland, what's your number one piece of advice for your successor when it comes to President Trump?
Understand that the win-win is what we need. Making sure that everyone understands that we do better when we work together, that yes, the American president has a capacity to hurt the Canadian economy. There's no question about that. But anything an American president does to hurt the Canadian economy will also hurt American consumers, American workers, and American growth. We do better when we work together to take on the world, whether it's China or Russia or anywhere else. When we work together, we can't be stopped. And that's the focus that we need.
So join the United States. Let's join forces. Yeah, let's join forces. Yeah, let's join forces, Trudeau. Let's join forces. Okay? Let's join forces, come together, and let's do great things together, okay? All right. What is going on in Los Angeles, California?
I think that Gavin is largely incompetent, and I think the mayor is largely incompetent, and probably both of them are just stone cold incompetent. What they've done is terrible.
President-elect Trump ripping into California's response to the wildfires, but he is not the only one blaming Governor Gavin Newsom. Watch this California mom.
Governor, I live here, Governor. That was my daughter's school, Governor. Please tell me what you're going to do. I'm not going to hurt him, I promise.
I'm literally talking to the president right now to specifically answer the question of what we can do for you and your daughter.
Can I hear it? Can I hear your call? Because I don't believe it.
I'm sorry. There's literally, I've tried 5 times. That's why I'm walking around to make the call.
Why is the president?
And Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass had a difficult time answering reporter questions about her response. Watch this.
What explains this lack of preparation and rapid response?
Let me just say, first and foremost, my number one focus, and I think the focus of all of us here with one voice, is that we have to protect lives, we have to save lives, and we have to save homes. Rest assured that when
that did not
rest
happen.
assured, let me finish. We will absolutely do an evaluation to look at what worked, what didn't work.
The New York Post out with an editorial that says this: LA fires show deadly results of voting for Democrats like Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. Joining me now is former California Congressman and former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker McCarthy, great to see you this morning. Thanks very much for weighing in here. You live in California. You've been the Speaker of the House. You've watched and discussed the policies out of California. What is your assessment of what's taken place here?
Devastation. I mean, pure failure. If you think for Gavin Newsom, he's been lieutenant governor 8 years, governor for 6 years. Prior to being sworn in, we had another deadly fire up in Paradise where 85 Californians died and one in Malibu. I joined President Trump at the time. We flew out, spent the day with Gavin, who was governor-elect, and Jerry Brown, the governor. I listened to President Trump tell them they have to change their behavior. Wind will come, a fire will come. But what a fire needs to continue is fuel. You need to take down the vegetation. You have to be prepared for this. Other states are prepared for hurricane. You got to pre-position. You cannot have firefighters go and fight a fire with no water. You cannot allow when winds are coming if you didn't prep the vegetation ahead of time. And then what do you do during the fire? Last night, they sent an evacuation notice to everyone in Los Angeles by mistake. Can you imagine what that does to people? Can you imagine? Then secondly, today we learned that two of the LA County leases 2 super soakers from Canada. One of them got hit by a private drone. And so that super soaker is down. This is such an intense fire that it is so hot. When you're dropping the water, some is evaporating before it even hits. We have 200 firefighters from my town down there fighting right now. They said they've never seen it. This is a war zone. And I know of individuals that have missing family they haven't heard from for days. And this is the compounded mismanagement of Gavin Newsom. People stayed behind to fight the fire because they had lost their homeowner insurance because Gavin Newsom has avoided this issue and insurance have been leaving California. And it's an elderly gentleman who sat there when he should not have been, and they have not been able to find him.
Well, I mean, we're just looking at some of the moves that were made just recently. For example, just 2 weeks ago, the fire department of Los Angeles decided to not do their annual testing of the fire hydrants. Karen Bass, the mayor, cut $17.5 million from the fire department. You know, why? Here's one tweet from Sarah Foster. She writes, "We pay the highest taxes in California. Our fire hydrants were empty. Our vegetation was overgrown. Brush was not cleared. Our reservoirs were emptied by our governor because tribal leaders wanted to save fish." I mean, the water coming from Canada they sent to the Pacific Ocean to save the fish? Really?
This is outrageous. And Maria, my father was a firefighter. He became a fire chief. I was a firefighter for 3 years, the seasonal. One thing I would tell you, we would go around and you work on the hydrants. You prep the hydrants and go through. That's part of the work that you do. But what Gavin has done with the pure infrastructure, if you are a leader, there's a few items you're supposed to get done. Public safety. Make sure the infrastructure is there for any disaster. They have failed on both measures because Gavin's priorities have been different. Gavin's priorities have not been the homelessness, the crime, and now the devastation where homes are just wiped out. You see these pictures, they're horrendous, but if you're ever on the ground, it is a war zone people talk about, that they've never seen some. The intensity. Can you imagine whether not even knowing if you could sleep in your house? You could be far from the fire, but the winds are ripping through and the preparation is not there, and then you get a notice you're supposed to leave? This is all the work that should have been done. Gavin Newsom has been in office for more than 12 years, the lieutenant governor or governor. It falls directly on him. What has he been doing running around the country? What has he been doing? President Trump has done more for California. He put an executive order in to allow more water to be pumped through the Delta, to come through the Central Valley, to come to Southern California. And you know who fought him? Gavin Newsom. The voters of California passed Prop 1 to spend their tax dollars to build more dams, to store more water. You know who tore them down? Gavin Newsom.
Unbelievable.
This rests directly on what he has done.
What are they spending their money on? They're spending their money on drug addict kits, right? They've got the drug kits for the drug addicts. They've got more money for illegals. So now the question becomes, who's going to help California? And are we actually going to see that continuing resolution on March 14th include disaster money? The next step likely to be the enactment of disaster legislation to pay for the rebuilding here, right? Is that going to be the vehicle, do you think, for wildfire emergency and the debt limit? Because we've got a report from Cowen where an analyst this morning is telling clients that the rebuilding of the infrastructure and the emergency housing and replenishing FEMA will have to be part of that.
You're going to have to do something. These poor people in California should not be punished for Gavin Newsom. But what should have to happen in there is the policies have to change. And I will tell you, in California, there's going to be a number of people who have lost their home insurance because of that.
I want to play Warren Davidson for you. I just spoke with the Ohio congressman, and I asked him this question as well. Kevin, listen to this.
But California wants the money without changing the policies that are making the problem bad or worse. And I don't see how Republicans could possibly support that. I mean, we support the people that are plagued by disaster, but we have to put pressure on the California government to change course here.
I see. So has there been discussion already about the federal help that's coming to California? And are you saying that there's a little bit of pushback unless you see policy changes?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, how do you do that? Because you don't want to send the message to families, oh, we're not going to take care of you. They certainly didn't have a problem saying that to people in Western North Carolina in the Biden administration. Instead, the Biden administration, oh, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of everything. And so different response when it's out there where the Hollywood elites live. But when it comes to congressional funding, the idea that we're going to have an open checkbook, no matter how bad your policies are, is crazy.
That's basically what you just said, Kevin. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the direction is the people should never have to hurt in this, because California is more devastated because many of these people, unbeknownst to themselves, they did nothing wrong. They lost their homeowner insurance because of Gavin Newsom. What they fundamentally need to do here is maybe direct the money through a different source, but make sure the people get their money. What you need to do as well is Gavin Newsom has got to focus on the infrastructure. He should listen to President Trump when it comes to water policy, when it comes to vegetation, because I've been in a situation watching Californians die, discussing this, and President Trump was right when he told them then, you've got to prepare ahead of time. Wind's going to come. A fire's going to come. But the only way it progresses to be bigger and stronger if it has fuel. You've got to knock the fuel down. And they weren't prepared. Then when the fire came, the infrastructure itself, the evacuation, the hydrants, the water for that, they were not prepared for that. And we've got the Olympics coming to Los Angeles. What is going on? What the voters of California need to do is change the management throughout California to get real management for our state.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the agenda then? A group of House Republicans are traveling to Mar-a-Lago this weekend to discuss the reconciliation strategy. President Trump is planning to meet separately with the committee chairman and the Freedom Caucus and the GOP members of the SALT Caucus. Do you see the New York and L.A. congressmen or lawmakers trying to keep Congress hostage until they get their SALT deduction lifted? Is that where we are right now, Kevin?
I don't think they're going to hold anything hostage. Everybody's got to make sure, because if you do not get a reconciliation done, that means you don't get the tax policy done this year and taxes all go up. You find common ground. And this is where the leadership of President Trump is so rewarding, that he's bringing people in now. Because the House actually has a smaller majority, and this is an interesting little fact. It's the first time in modern history the majority in the Senate is bigger than the majority in the House. And come January 20th, they're going to drop 2 more seats with Elise Stefanik and Mike Waltz going into the administration. So it takes some time to fill those seats as well. But they need to get their work done. And President Trump knows he's going to work every single
Thank you for tuning into the live stream. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. For sure, Trump is a leader of leaders. Okay, this is what he is, and this is sad. What's going on in Los Angeles County? It is absolutely sad. Okay, it is absolutely sad. With that being said, bless you, baby. With that being said, Gavin Newsom should resign. Okay, he needs to resign. All right, and Gulf of Mexico is now going to be Gulf of America. Okay, Gulf of America. So you can drink some water on that. Leaders that are actually capable are back in the White House.
We also want to bring down Peter Doocy because Peter Doocy is talking about the federal response to this and what President-elect Trump is saying and where we plan to go from here with help from our federal neighbors. Peter, what do you know?
Trace, to build off of what you were just talking about, President-elect Trump is also watching as this $50 billion 0% contained fire continues to spread, and he's got a suggestion on Truth Social. He says Governor Gavin Newsom should immediately go to Northern California and open up the water main and let the water flow into his dry, starving, burning state instead of having it go out into the Pacific Ocean. It ought to be done right now. No more excuses from this incompetent governor. It's already far too late. And this cleanup and rebuild are going to be a huge undertaking during Trump's next term.
So what's happened is a tragedy, and the governor has not done a good job. With that being said, I got along well with him when he was governor. We worked together very well, and we would work together. I guess it looks like we're going to be the one having to rebuild it.
Newsom is taking a lot of incoming from frustrated Californians, and he says he doesn't think it's the time for Trump to be involving himself right now.
People have lost their lives. Kids lost their schools, families completely torn asunder, churches burned down. This guy wanted to politicize it. I have a lot of thoughts, and I know what I want to say. I won't.
You have nothing to say, Newsom. You have absolutely nothing to say. You could have signed the water restoration bill, but you did not sign it. Newsom was closing down dams in Los Angeles, in California. He wouldn't let the water flow into California. He's trying to save what? He's trying to save smelt. He's trying to save the salmon. He prefers to have the fishes in the fresh water than to actually save human beings, people that are actually valuable. Okay? He prefers the fish than human life. He prefers the fish than valuable properties. I see.
President-elect Trump is back at Mar-a-Lago after the Carter funeral in Washington, D.C., and we do expect to see him about 2.5 hours from right now at the club when he hosts Republican governors who are here. Trace.
Welcome back. President-elect Trump and Gavin Newsom trading shots on who's to blame and who's politicizing what over the deadly wildfires that have ravaged the Golden State. Watch.
It's very sad because I've been trying to get Gavin Newsom to allow water to come. You'd have tremendous water up there. They send it out to the Pacific because they're trying to protect a tiny little fish.
Well, he isn't the only person calling out Greasy Gav. Watch this.
Literally talking to the president right now to specifically answer the question of what we can do for you and your daughter.
Can I hear it? Can I hear your call? Because I don't believe it. Why was there no water in the hydrants, Governor?
Dana.
Oh my God. Why was there no water in the fire hydrant? And you pay one of the highest taxes in the country. California, you have what? Los Angeles had no water in the fire hydrant? Oh yeah, he needs to resign, yo.
That woman speaks for so many. There is so much frustration. They are angry at Karen Bass. They're particularly angry at this governor who's had a long, long time to fix these problems that Rick Caruso has said that they predicted them. They could have prevented them.
And Gavin Newsom basically has the run of government out there with the state legislature, right? So if you wanted to put some points on the board and get some things done, you could have. You've also could have had he had the political might to be able to tell the environmentalists, go pound sand. We're not going to leave kindling around here when we know these Santa Ana winds are coming. We are going to clear the brush. And yes, we are going to fill the reservoirs. Do not file that. Do not defend that lawsuit. There are lots of things that he could have done. I was thinking today, imagine if Ron DeSantis were the governor of Florida. I'm sorry, the governor of California. Yeah. Even for a year, the things that might be different today. And I think that her being willing to go up to him and Gavin Newsom being willing to talk to her at least, rather than Karen Bass, who was just dumbfounded after 14 hours on a flight and couldn't come up with "I'm sorry." But what was she doing? Just watching the flight map for 14 hours? And
no, she said she was on the phone, but it doesn't feel like
it doesn't really look like it. But they didn't fill up the reservoirs. This is also something that, one, there's the short-term problem, but there is a longer-term problem. And we've talked about that with the little Delta smelt and all of these things. There is a reckoning coming. And one of the exciting things for people that want to regroup and have better environmental and land conservation policies going forward is that with this new administration, you have a lot of different people that will be there. And one of them is Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota. He understands these issues very, very well and will be instrumental in helping make this happen. And then Brooke Rollins over at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, they oversee forests. So I think you're going to see a concentrated effort to make sure this doesn't happen again. But we're just at that tipping point of understanding the scope and scale of this disaster.
Yes.
And that woman was just one person who lost everything, doesn't know where her kids are going to go to school.
No, the schools have literally burned down. And again, you're talking about something that is so incredibly personal. But Greg, obviously you are from California. Gavin Newsom has had a lot of time to fix these things, but he doesn't want to because they're not sexy. You know, as you pointed out in the past, he's much more interested in virtue signaling and talking about things that feel good and make him seem like a good person, as opposed to tackling the things that he's not going to get a lot of credit for, that take a lot more work, but will help the long-term health of the state should he resign.
Excellent question. You know, I find that these strongest anti-communists were once communists. You know, the most persuasive Republicans are usually an ex-Democrat that was burned by their policies. Look at the trans movement. The most persuasive voices on against child mutilation are the detransitioners. You look at the most interesting Republicans we have now, they're basically canceled Democrats, Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Tulsi. So the most powerful agent for change is the person burned by their own beliefs. And I think you're going to see that. I was just thinking, too, the reaction to the fires in L.A. kind of mirrored the reaction to crime in New York. It's where the public suddenly realizes that there's no help coming. There's no help coming. And we sit there and we talked about crime for years and nobody listened. We have a governor who went on the subway and said how safe it is. And days later, a woman was set on fire. Ironically, it took a woman in flames to get people to realize that platitudes won't save you. And it's doing that right here. Lastly, it's weird. I was just thinking about this, that, you know, so many people are homeless. There's like thousands of homeless people. I don't think any of them are going to be sleeping on the streets. Just think about why not? What's the difference?
Well, the money is allocated towards something that hasn't gotten better. It has only gotten worse.
No, I'm just saying there are people who are homeless that aren't going to be on the streets. So why are the homeless on the streets? You know what I mean? It's like, we think like they don't have, there's something about the lifestyle. If you have a network of people around you, if you haven't cut yourself off from the world, you will find a place.
So people are angry. The anger has to go somewhere. Why shouldn't it go to the governor?
It should. And I think that he feels okay about it. I mean, he wasn't trying to turn his back on her and push her off on a staffer. I think that Gavin Newsom, especially in the post-French Laundry world, understands that you need to do constituent relations better, and you need to be a public face for it. And I haven't seen him cowering from this. I think that's
the only thing he does. I think he's the public face, and I think he's really good at optics. But when he says things like, we're going to leave the water up to the local folks, it's a state issue. It's not just a local issue. And
I think he was trying, it was a longer conversation than just that soundbite, obviously. And I'm not here to say that everything has gone perfectly. Obviously not. It's going to be $52 billion probably to repair this. You know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands displaced. I hope that it's only 5 who have passed away, but we don't know. And it's not because I'm a Pollyanna or I can't take it. I just don't see why it's worthwhile for President-elect Trump to be calling him Gavin Newsom, or to say, like, you should resign right now. Like, if Barack Obama had shown up in New Jersey after Sandy and said, like, hey, Chris, you could lose a few pounds or something like that, or gone down to Florida and said to DeSantis, like, those lifts are doing a lot of work down there, right? How tall are you really? Like, why
I don't
be
think that-
petulant?
I don't think he's...
Yeah, he is. He's making fun. Greasy Gavin Newsom.
But Jessica,
He's
that's
making
the
fun of
issue
him.
with you guys.
No, it's
You're
not.
so obsessed with talk.
I'm not.
And not
Because
action.
I have action things to say on top of that. I'm making a
Well, then
point
say
about...
'em.
Say it. Just say what you want to say talking about Gavin Newsom, because he's acting like a scum, basically. People have died. Like 6 people are now confirmed dead by the Los Angeles Police Department. And she's here talking about the fact that Trump calls him Gavin Newsom. Oh, God. Democrats.
Jessica, because no one
Well,
cares
stop talking
about
so I can.
name calling. All right?
Actually, some people...
No one cares. Nobody cares, girl. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. People are already dead. People lost their houses. People lost properties that they thought they would retire on. Investment properties gone. And you're here talking about Trump calls him Gavin Newsom. Who cares? He is acting like a scum, so deserves to be called Gavin Newsom. Trump is usually the problem to these people. Trump is the issue. Trump, 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 Trump. Your city is burning to the ground. Trump, Trump, Trump.
People do.
No,
and
no one cares what he calls him, Jessica. The state is on fire. The state's on fire, and you're out here saying they have water.
No.
They don't have water.
I'm saying that the tanks were full. There was a pressure problem. Either way,
Jessica, there's a pressure problem because their tank was empty,
The governor
all right?
of California should not have to put a fact check up on his site that says Trump is conflating 2 entirely unrelated things: the conveyance of water to South California and supply from local storage. No such document as, quote, water restoration declaration exists. It's pure fiction. Why can't President-elect Trump take the mandate that he got, right? A lot of left-leaning people voted for him and show up and just say...
I know we're in the middle of Jesse on Jesse action, but let's hear from Jesse Water.
I was loving that
Boy,
action.
Jesse.
I mean, I have press releases from the state, from the DOJ. California sues Trump administration to block water rules. Attorney General Becerra files lawsuit against Trump administration. They're trying to send water from the north to the south, and they're suing them to stop it because of fish that no one eats, Jessica. That's all we're saying. That's what we're saying. We're saying that the guy can't run the state, and he's sitting there with his hands in his pockets. And you're bringing up the homeless. There's a good chance the homeless started this fire. Did you know that 54% of the fires that the LA Fire Department respond to were started by the homeless? And we're spending more money on the homeless than we are on stopping these fires, Jessica. This guy is a bad executive, and he wants to run for president, and he's got no army behind him. Bezos is gone. Bezos is in Mar-a-Lago. Zuckerberg's at Mar-a-Lago. Who's going to stand with Newsom while everything's burnt to a crisp? Nobody.
Not his wealthy billionaire donors who used to have homes. They're certainly not going to stand with him and bankroll his presidential run. I think this hurts his legacy, and I don't think he rebounds from this.
Jessica,
and I hope he doesn't.
Whoever smelt it, dealt it.
John, to that point, we've been seeing the planes come in. They can only do so much from Quebec. You were noting earlier, but this is ongoing, and the biggest fires are still at 0% containment, as far as we've been told.
Yeah, and to Larry's point about the water, the president-elect is watching this afternoon. He also saw our segments with Molly and with Jackie, and he texted me this statement just a couple of minutes ago. He's still on Governor Newsom to do something about this immediately in terms of diverting water to the southern part of the state. He wrote, quote, Governor Gavin Newsom should immediately go to Northern California and open up the water main and let the water flow into his dry, starving, burning state instead of having it go out into the Pacific Ocean. It ought to be done right now. No more excuses from this incompetent governor. It's already far too late. So that's the latest from the president-elect on California, what he thinks the governor should do to take immediate action to help the folks in the southern part of the state.
Just brutal. I mean, so many people are just in the thick of this right now. And as we know, officials are saying they're still in survival mode, looking for anybody who may have not fled or left or evacuated that might be in this mess. So we pray for them.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that they weren't able to get water up to those reservoirs in the upper elevations to keep the water pressure up, I mean, that's a serious problem because clearly they didn't have any plans for anything this big.
Joining us for more on this is Steve Bardak, who owns 2 properties in the Pacific Palisades. Thank you, sir, very much for joining us. What concerns you most at this hour?
I think what concerns me most at this hour is the gross mismanagement by Mayor Bass of this entire operation. You know, she's been absent.
The mayor was attending the Ghana president's inauguration. The mayor of Los Angeles, she was in Ghana when this fire started. What is going on in California?
And asleep at the wheel and was in Ghana until yesterday. We don't have a real plan. You know, we had hydrants that were dry in the Palisades, which is inexcusable. We really don't understand what the plan is to retrieve the hundreds of cars that were abandoned, mine included, on Sunset Boulevard. You know, there was no evacuation plan. When we got the order for evacuation, we had thousands of people trying to leave through the same egress, and it turned into gridlock. Then the fire came down to Sunset Boulevard. It consumed both sides of the roads, and the cops told us to get out of the car and to run for our lives. So I grabbed my dog and ran down Sunset Boulevard.
Just incredible. As we look at some of these live shots of the utter devastation in the Pacific Palisades, this is Jonathan Hunt's shot. These houses just leveled. All that's left is, in some cases, a fireplace. You mentioned Karen Bass and the leadership that is being called into question pretty severely at this hour. She just led a news conference where she was still dodging questions after this moment went viral from yesterday as she was making her way back into town at the airport. Listen.
Have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today? Elon Musk says that you're utterly incompetent. Are you considering your position? Madam Mayor, have you absolutely nothing to say to the citizens today who are dealing with this disaster?
This, as many are asking, where is the management of this absolute crisis? And where was it leading up to it?
Sure. We also have to ask 2 different questions right now, which is, what are we going to do about the sharp increases in insurance premiums that are going to happen because of this mass casualty event? You know, that has to be, we have to have a plan for that. Who's going to actually manage the build back of Los Angeles? We actually need a person that has proven expertise in development that can oversee this type of a project, who is an effective leader. We need somebody like Rick Caruso.
Yeah.
We don't need somebody that is going to take taxpayer-funded boondoggle trips to Ghana and be asleep at the wheel while the city is burning.
Steve, you know, it's interesting what you're saying there. These are live pictures, by the way. We continue to watch as they are able to get some aircraft up in the air while there's a dip in the wind speed right now. Just want to finish off with this because, to your point, Adam Kroll, a resident of that area, is suggesting that once people leave, and a lot of times when this happens and it's this bad, they don't come back. Watch.
You guys all voted for Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles. You all voted for Gavin Newsom. And now you get what you get. Oh, now that your house is on fire, well, now you're thinking about something else. Now you want to know what's going on. What's going on around here? All these people who were deep blue Democrats are now going to have to pull a permit to rebuild. And when they start running into the bureaucracy and the red tape, they're going to start going nuts, and they're going to vote for Rick Caruso next time because they want to get, that's all Trump says, is we're going to pull back the regulations.
I just want to say Rick Caruso was on this program yesterday, ran against her in 2022 and lost. I want to get your quick final thought on that.
I think Los Angeles made a mistake. Karen Bass does not serve the interests of LA residents. Some of the decisions are nonsensical, such as cutting $17.6 million from LA Fire Department's budget, but instead prioritizing homelessness, where roughly half of the funds of $1.3 billion was not even spent. And it just doesn't make any sense. Where are her priorities? What is her strategy? Where is the plan? She doesn't have one. We need a proven leader that is effective, that understands priorities, that understands business, like Rick Caruso.
Yeah, well, that Palisades fire is still at 0% containment, so there is a lot still at risk here, and the threat is still very real. And we appreciate you joining us, Steve, on all of that. Our best to you.
Thank you very much.
President-elect Trump is calling out California's Gavin Newsom over the state's response to the fires and its long-term planning.
Nate Foy is live in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Nate.
Hey guys, good morning. President-elect Donald Trump is highly critical of California Governor Gavin Newsom's water management decisions in the years preceding these horrific fires. Namely, Trump says that Newsom should have and refused to sign a water declaration or
Tiny little fish. And for the sake of a smelt, they have no water. They had no water in the fire hydrants today in Los Angeles. This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration.
So Trump is referring to a 2020 memorandum that he signed meant to bring more water to Los Angeles and other parts of California, but the state said it wasn't scientifically justified and sued to block it for concerns about endangered species. Newsom's office pushes back on Trump's story, saying, quote, "There's no such document as the Water Restoration Declaration. That is pure fiction." Meanwhile, Trump is demanding Newsom's resignation, writing on Truth Social, quote, "One of the best and most beautiful parts of the United States of America is burning down to the ground. It's ashes, and Gavin Newsom should resign. This is all his fault." Here's Newsom last night.
One can't even respond to it. I mean, it's people are literally fleeing. People have lost their lives. Kids lost their schools. Families completely torn asunder. Churches burned down. This guy wanted to politicize it.
What is the situation with the water? Obviously, in Palisades, it ran out last night in the hydrants.
The local folks are trying to figure that out. I mean, just when you have a
local folks are trying to figure that out in your state, and you are the leader. You're talking about the local folks are going to figure it out. How are you the governor of California? How? If the local folks are supposed to figure it out, your city is burning to the ground. The local folks are going to figure it out. Yeah, you need to resign.
system is not dissimilar to what we've seen in other extraordinarily large-scale fires, whether it be pipe, electricity, or whether it just be the complete overwhelm of the system.
Trump will attend former President Jimmy Carter's funeral in Washington, D.C. today, and then he'll fly back to Palm Beach, where he will meet with Republican governors at Mar-a-Lago tonight. We'll send it back to you.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy, Genesis. Double tap your screen, subscribe to the channel, and join the membership of the channel. It is $4.99. Thank you guys so much. Support the channel. God bless you. If you get any sort of information from this channel, double tap your screen, subscribe to the channel, and join the membership. California is burning to the ground. Sad to see. This is just the 10th day of the year 2025, and we already have this disasters going on. ISIS attack on in New Orleans, and now the fire in California. We already had the explosion of the Tesla truck in the front of Trump International in Las Vegas. New York already going bonkers since last year. Now we have this. What else is next? Trump was sentenced today. Too sad, y'all. Starting 2025 with this right here.
For many people impacted by these fires, at least 5 now, there is
Nothing
nowhere
left
to go. CNN's Kyung La spoke to some of the people who returned to survey the devastation.
Right over here is my kitchen, my living room. Oh my God. Pots and pans and stuff right there. Oh my God. Yeah.
Hey, 25 years I've been here. Easy, 25. Gone. Less than 3 hours.
When you look out at your neighborhood, what happened here?
It just looked like a war zone here. This is a war zone. Looked just like a war zone.
I saw the fire at 2 o'clock. I took a picture, and at 4 o'clock my phone went off and it says evacuate, evacuate. And that's what we did. There's nothing left. I literally just have the clothes on my back. There's nothing. Things that my grandmother gave me, my granddaughter, she's always making me something, and I put it in a frame, you know. I don't have those no more.
Yvette said that this guy's house was touched by God.
It had to be, because it sure didn't burn.
But if his house is touched by God, what happened to the rest of the neighborhood?
God didn't care about us. There it shows it right now. But I'm going.
Oh my God. This man. This man right here. He's a comedian, y'all. This man right here is a comedian. He said, yeah, because God didn't care about us, right?
Put it in a frame, you know. I don't have those no more.
Yvette said that this guy's house was touched by God.
It had to be, because it sure didn't burn.
But if his house is touched by God, what happened to the rest of the neighborhood?
God didn't care about us. There it shows it right now. But I'm going to let this go, and I'm going to close my gate, and I'm going to get out of here, because it's just making me sick.
Oh my God, that is devastating. Ken Long, thanks for bringing us their point of view. Let's go live now to Pacific Palisades. Our Maribel Gonzalez has been covering the fires there. And I mean, the scene looks the same, whether it's behind Stephanie Elam's live shot or behind yours. I mean, all you see is charred rubble.
Yeah, good morning, Frederica. And that is because that is what so much of this picturesque neighborhood now looks like, a complete ghost town. Where we are at right now is one of the neighborhoods that has been impacted. And as you can see, this where we're standing used to be somebody's home. All that remains right now are ashes, debris, rubble. Standing is the entranceway, what appears to be a steel beam entranceway, and a chimney in the background. This scene repeated blocks and blocks into this neighborhood in the downtown area as well. And we know that hundreds of thousands of people right now are under evacuation orders or warnings. And for the people that had to leave, they can't go back home. But when they do, this is what so many of them are facing.
And then what today might be the focus for authorities? You know, we know that law enforcement is also fanning out to several communities because people are, I mean, sadly, they are looting some of these properties. What's happening in that area where you are?
Yeah, we did hear that there were at least 20 people arrested for looting. The city has imposed a curfew in the evacuation orders to try to prevent that from happening. But today the focus will continue to be on those containments. Here in the Pacific Palisades, this is one of the largest fires here. It's at only 6% containment. Luckily, the winds have died down, Frederica, so that will allow firefighters to get a leg up on this fire. We saw that happening yesterday with planes doing these aerial drops. Hopefully they will be able to do that today. But again, the fear is that those winds might pick up again. So really, they're just working around the clock to try to do that before that happens.
Oh, they are indeed doing incredible work. Maribel Gonzalez, thank you so much. Again, a live view right now of the fires still burning. I mean, they are raging, still out of control. Very little of these, at least 5 now, separate fires are contained.
Let me show you this. Look at these 2 photos. This on the right is what is left of a home in Altadena. And then you see on the left, the beautiful home that it was just days ago. Look at that side by side. This is what has been lost for our next guest, Florence Kearns Wilson. She joins us right now. Florence, thank you. We were just talking in the break. We are so sorry to see what has been lost by your family. You and your wife, you had just moved into that home 3 weeks ago, right before Christmas. I mean, how are you guys doing?
That's right, yeah. I mean, how you expect. We're lucky to be safe. We got out just in time with our baby and our 2 cats and my parents, who had actually evacuated to our house from their house. So, in some ways we're lucky, but we lost absolutely everything. I mean, we didn't have time to really pack. So it's surreal. It's devastating.
Surreal is something we've heard from so many people because it seems almost impossible to process. You're in your home one moment, and in a matter of what really is minutes, it just basically has been evaporated. I mean, how did you learn about what happened to your home?
Mostly, so we were driving, and honestly, I grew up in the area. I've been through a lot of fires, and where we bought our home, I assured my wife and everyone, this is too far into the neighborhood. Like a fire will never come down this far. And so we learned about it. We were driving up to Santa Barbara because we were going to Morro Bay. We didn't know where else to go. And I was just texting with neighbors. Someone put together a Google map trying to tag structures that had.
Ladies and gentlemen, it says here 10 dead, 35,000 plus acres burned, thousands evacuated. And everybody's still saying, don't blame anybody. This is just a natural disaster. Nobody should be held responsible, accountable. Oh, really? I don't think so.
Had burned, but wasn't very up to date. And finally, God, 2 days, not yesterday, the day before, the day it happened, it was so fast. A friend was able to go to the neighborhood once it had completely burned down and send us a video. And that's when we found out for sure.
And what went through your mind when you saw that? I mean, I can't even imagine you were able to process it.
So don't ask.
I almost threw up, honestly. I don't know if I fully processed it, to be honest with you.
I mean, your entire neighborhood looks like it was just wiped out. I mean, what have you heard from your neighbors? Have you been able to get in contact with them?
Yes, we're lucky that even though we had just moved in, we had already communicated a lot with our neighbors who were so welcoming and kind. And, we have a few group texts going with them, and we've been able to share the pictures we've gotten from other folks who've been able to go in there. And we're all completely shocked and devastated. And just, kind of yesterday we started, talking about making plans to get together and just cry together once it's safe for us all to go back.
Yeah. Have you and your wife, you have a 2-year-old daughter. You have a whole life you were creating in Altadena. Have you even started conversations with your wife about next steps?
Not in a serious way. We've been, you have to make jokes and stuff in these times, and she always wanted a pool, and so I was saying, well, I guess let's just build the pool first, and then we can build a tiny little home or something. But we haven't really, in a serious way, to be honest. We don't really know what's going to happen. It's one thing if just your house burns, which is terrible, and you rebuild it, but with the whole neighborhood absolutely flattened, I mean, we're going to have to work together with all of our neighbors, or it's just going to, I don't know, get sold off to a developer or something,
There is a lot.
And that is what a lot of people, real estate people, have been talking about. The big dogs, the rich corporations, the big, huge conglomerates are going to come in here and they're going to scoop every land. And then these people would have to rebuy it back. And they're going to buy it at a premium because the insurance companies is most likely is going to basically probably scam these people, because some people may not even get payment back. If the government doesn't help these people, most insurance companies are not going to help. This is just what this is not like facts. This is not truth. This is just my personal opinion. But I know for a fact that, in my personal opinion, most insurance companies are going to bail. They're going to bail, and none of these people are going to get help. So, good luck.
That this disaster for your family and the neighborhood is, you've got a lot to process and to go through, and so many things to consider. I'm sure it seems really overwhelming right now. So I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us your story. And
yeah, too spicy, yeah.
President Biden speaking about the fires. Let's listen.
Yesterday, I immediately approved Governor Newsom's request for what they call, and I know this is all sounds like government talk, but it's called the Major Disaster Declaration. This declaration allows folks, at the request of the governor, the declaration allows folks who have been impacted to get immediate cash assistance to cover things like everything from groceries to baby formula to prescriptions, because as you've seen and you've reported, a lot of these places are burned to the ground. There's not a single thing left in their homes. And so if they contact disasterassistance.gov, anybody who's lost everything or anything of consequence, disasterassistance.gov or 1-800-2, I beg your pardon, 1-800-621-3362. That's what they, disasterassistance.gov, 1-800-621-3362 to get the kind of help they need for everything from the basics that they don't have access to right now. And this morning, due to the magnitude of the disaster, I was talking with the governor, and he requested if I could increase the federal funding that was authorized under this legislation from 75% to 90%. We're increasing it to 100% of all the costs to be covered by the federal government for both the fire management assistance grants and the elements of what they call the disaster declaration. So today I'm announcing that the federal government will cover 100% of the cost for 180 days. This is going to pay for things like debris and hazard material removal, temporary shelters, first responders' salaries, and all necessary measures to protect life and property. And folks, I want to underscore, I told the governor and local officials, spare no expense to do what they need to do and contain these fires and in their communities that have really been devastating. And we're doing literally everything we can at a federal level. That's also why I call this group of folks around this table of all relevant federal departments and agencies together to discuss what more we can do, and some of the folks around the screen as well. Before we begin things, here's an update on where things stand right now. First, we're focused on helping contain these fires. Over the last 24 hours, the United States Forest Service, working with state and local responders, has suppressed over 50 fire starts. And the fire in the Hollywood Hills has been contained by brave firefighters risking their lives. Right now, 3 major fires are still burning in the Pacific Palisades, in Pasadena, and in Sylmar. I want to be clear. What I know from talking to the governor, that there are concerns out there that there's also been a water shortage. The fact is, the utilities understandably shut off power because they're worried the lines that they carry the energy were going to be blown down and spark additional fires. But the Cal Fire, when they did that, it cut off the ability to generate pumping the water. That's what caused the lack of water in these hydrants. And so Cal Fire is bringing in generators to get these pumps up and working again so that there's no longer a shortage of water coming out of these hydrants. I'm also surging all federal resources possible to Southern California, including 400 additional federal firefighters, over 30 firefighting helicopters and planes. federally supplied firefighting planes and helicopters, and 8 Department of Defense C-130s that are equipped to suppress wildfires. Today, the Secretary of Defense also authorized 500 wildfire ground clearing personnel from the Defense Department. And I've directed the department to continue working with Governor Newsom to identify additional resources that can be provided for public safety and security. And we've secured additional firefighters and firefighting aircraft from our ally in Canada as well. I also want everyone in Southern California to know we're going to keep at it. We're sticking with this. We expect there may be a temporary break in the winds, but in some areas the winds are likely to continue well into next week. And so we're going to continue to sending everything, literally, every resource we can find that's appropriate to help the government and the first responders. Second, we're focused on helping people who have been displaced or in many cases lost everything. You reported on, you've seen the homes just burned to the ground, whole areas burned to the ground, large areas. They've been displaced and they've lost everything. As I said, since the fire started, FEMA has been working with the state to help residents get shelter, groceries, prescription, and other critical goods like baby formula. We're also sent FEMA Director Criswell to Los Angeles to manage our response on the ground. She was supposed to be on this call, but we have the deputy here because she is out in the field with the governor right now, surveying what's going on. Let me close with a message to the people of Southern California. We are with you. We're not going anywhere. To the firefighters and first responders, you are heroes. Many of these firefighters are out there risking their lives and some, well, I won't go beyond that, but risking their lives, and while their own homes are in danger, their families are in danger. To the firefighters and first responders, you really are, it's not hyperbole, you're heroes. You're genuinely heroes. And the worst, this is the most widespread, devastating fire in California's history. It's amazing. And there's nobody understands it better than the press. We've been covering this on a minute-to-minute basis. And you literally have to run into the flames, these firefighters. You know, that old expression, God made man, then he made a few firefighters. Who runs into flames? You know, in doing so, you're leaving your own families and who may be in harm's way as well. So we owe you. And we're going to make sure that you get every resource you need, every possible resource you need. You know, to the families who have been impacted by this disaster, you're living through a nightmare, I know. And I promise you, we're going to help you get through this and eventually recover and rebuild. I'm going to turn it over now to the Vice President before we go on to the folks in the various cabinet positions as well as agencies that control these issues. Madam Vice President, I know you're directly affected, so you fire away. No pun intended.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. President, and also for the work that everyone around this table has been doing with the appropriate sense of urgency, because this is an urgent matter. What we have seen in California, and in particular in Southern California, is apocalyptic in terms of the nature of it and the unprecedented nature of it as well. And what we are seeing is a situation that is extremely dynamic. It is very much in play, and to some degree unpredictable, because we are literally waiting to see which way the wind blows. And I cannot praise enough the local leaders, most of whom I have talked with, and in particular our firefighters, who, as the President has said, they are working around the clock. They are working 12-hour, even longer shifts, and they are doing it with a sense of optimism, but also with an understanding of how serious this moment is and how important their work is to real lives and real people. Thousands of families have been displaced. Many of those families with young children with nowhere to go. And what we know is that this is a matter of current urgency, but this is also something that is going to have an impact for months and years to come. And on that point, I will also make note of the fact that Sadly, many insurance companies have canceled insurance for a lot of the families who have been affected and will be affected, which is only going to delay or place an added burden on their ability to recover.
I knew it. I knew the insurance company were going to cancel. Yeah. They're canceled because there's no way. I mean, the whole city, you're talking about thousands of houses burnt to ashes, and you expect them to cover thousands of houses? I mean, this insurance companies that cover, home insurance, they're not ready for 1,000 houses in one go. No, they're not ready. Nah, they ain't ready. They just, they act like they want to cover your home. They talk about, we're gonna protect your home insurance, home insurance. It's compulsory home insurance. Just wait till 10,000 homes file for a home insurance claim. Nah, they can't save you.
And I think that is an important point that must be raised, and hopefully there can be some way to address that issue, because these families, so many of them, otherwise will not have the resources to recover in any meaningful way. And many of them have lost everything. In the midst, however, of all of the trauma that has occurred, we have seen extraordinary acts of heroism. I am hearing countless stories of strangers helping strangers. People who are opening their homes where they are intact and have not had to evacuate, opening their homes to neighbors, to friends of neighbors, feeding them and providing shelter for them. And I do think that it speaks to the best of who we are as a country, which is in times of crisis, we find the heroes among us who we may not have known before, but act out of a sense of courage, but also a sense of community. And I applaud all those who are approaching this crisis with that.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. You know what time it is. It is your boy Genesis. Double tap your screen, subscribe to the channel. Yes, it is going down here. We bring you the updates going on in the nation. So if you don't keep up with what's going on in America, just tune into Genesis Madhouse's YouTube channel. You're going to get the update. Okay? You're going to get it. Anyway, Trump has been sentenced. So
President-elect Donald J. Trump appeared virtually to be sentenced in his criminal hush money case. In a dramatic statement, the judge made clear that Donald Trump would be sentenced without any jail time or any other penalty for that matter. And that's because of one reason, and only one reason: his status as soon-to-be 47th President of the United States. Trump spoke on his own behalf, showing no contrition, bragging about his election win, and slamming the justice system.
It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom.
CNN's Kara Scannell was inside that courtroom, and she joins us now. Kara, what was that like?
I mean, Dana, really an extraordinary moment. Donald Trump had been at every single day of this criminal trial, but today, the day of his sentencing, which he fought so hard to try to stop, he appeared on a video screen. It was set up in the courtroom, and when Trump delivered those statements to the judge, Judge Juan Merchan, who was sitting on the bench, had turned, was facing the monitor, watching Trump as he sat beside his attorney, Todd Blanche, and delivered those statements. And then the judge delivered his sentence. He also continued to look at that monitor as he spoke to the president-elect and explained to him that he could have sentenced him from as much as 1 1/3 to 4 years in prison on each count. But he emphasized, as you noted, that Trump is now reelected to the office of the presidency, and that weight, those legal obligations and benefits that he receives heading into that office, is what guided his sentence.
It is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. Ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the office of the President that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections.
Now, there was Judge Juan Merchan speaking there. You know, this is the first time that the public has heard the judge speak. Trump has been critical of the judge, calling him biased for months, both at the beginning of this trial and ever since the jury's verdict. The judge there explaining, you know, his belief that this sentence, even if it's an unconditional discharge, does reinforce that very jury verdict. And the public now can hear the judge, can hear his manner, his tone. That is exactly what he brought throughout the trial, that even in the face of Trump insulting him and the rule of law, the judge has maintained kind of that steady, even presence from the bench. As his parting words to Trump as he was wrapping up the sentencing was he said Godspeed to Trump as he entered the White House for his second term. Dana?
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, I cannot even imagine what it was like to be in there. Thank you for giving us so much of the color and, more importantly, the information. Kara, appreciate it. And I want to bring in some excellent reporters and legal experts here. CNN's chief legal affairs correspondent, Paula Reed, former federal prosecutor and CNN legal analyst Ellie Honig, former federal prosecutor Shan Wu, and CNN's very own Jeff Zeleny. Paula, I want to start with you now that we have the details, with the big picture here, because we sat at this table for months and months and months talking about not just this case, but the other cases that Donald Trump was being investigated on, was being prosecuted for, federal, New York, as he was running for president in the Republican primary, then, of course, in the general election. And here we are, just a little more than a week before he is going to take the oath of office again. And we learned the answer to a question that we've been asking, which is, what kind of impact is it going to be? And the answer is not only no politically, but legally. The answer is virtually nothing, aside from today, which is not nothing, but there's no penalty.
You face a more significant punishment for speeding in Manhattan than what Trump got today. He faced 4 criminal cases, some real serious legal jeopardy, particularly in the federal cases. But as of now, this is the only consequence, and it's de minimis. It's nothing. And his defense team deserves a lot of credit for guiding him through these cases and helping him to delay. But you know who also deserves a lot of credit? The courts and some prosecutors. I mean, we look today, we were 1 justice away from this sentencing not even happening today. 4 justices agreed that this sentencing should be delayed, which really surprised a lot of legal experts. They thought it was way too soon for the Supreme Court to get involved. Of course, a Trump-appointed judge down in Florida, she tossed out the classified documents case. That's on appeal, but that really shocked most legal experts. The Supreme Court waited 7 months to weigh in on immunity, made it impossible for Jack Smith to bring the January 6th case, and also gave him some immunity. And then down in Georgia, the final case, the lead prosecutor had a romantic relationship with the person she appointed to oversee the case. So yes, the Trump defense team has done an extraordinary job by their client here, but he also got a lot of breaks from questionable decisions within the judiciary and prosecutorial offices.
Okay, let's thank you for putting that sort of in the broader context. I do want to drill down on what we heard this morning, because just listening to it, we first got the quotes from the judge, and then we actually got the audio. And listening to it, it was really dramatic, listening to Judge Merchan, who, of course, Donald Trump has spent the better part of a year, maybe even more than a year, really trashing as somebody who is biased and so forth. The judge clearly wanted to, as Kara suggested, maintain an even keel. The kind of comment, though, that he made was very clear and deliberate. Kind of what you said, which is this is not so much the fact that he is getting no penalty, so much about what he is convicted of doing. It's about what he is about to become. Let's watch.
Yep. The considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the office of the chief executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, the protections afforded the office of the president are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow.
So, Ellie, to sum it up, what the judge is saying is that U.S. citizens don't get special treatment, but the office of the presidency does.
Yeah, the judge went out of his way to make a point in that clip we just heard him throughout today of saying, the reason I'm sentencing you to nothing is not because you did nothing wrong. The reason I'm sentencing you to nothing is because you have been reelected president. And out of respect, not even for you, President-elect Donald J. Trump, but the office of the presidency, that's why I'm doing this, and that's what compels this. And I'm glad you raised the point earlier, Dana, about the tone of the sentencing. People got to hear it. Obviously, Shannon and I have both been to many of them. But sentencing is a really solemn occasion. In a case like this, even where you know there's not going to be prison time, more so where somebody's going to have their liberty taken away. And I think it was a good lesson in the way our courtrooms and our processes should work. Everyone, I think, gets credit. I think the DA made a brief but compelling and concise presentation. Trump did his sort of usual song and dance, but in a subdued tone, right? I mean, Dana, you've heard him in different tones before, I'm sure, but he was subdued today. And I think the judge did a good job of saying, here's what brings us all here today, and here's why I'm making this decision. But ultimately, was Donald Trump unfairly singled out, or is he being held to account like anyone else? We'll let that one play out on appeal.
Shan?
I think decorum was certainly the winner today. I think Merchan's done a great job in the trial up until the conviction. Then I think he kind of got derailed. He overthought the case, in my opinion. He should have just sentenced the man and then let the appeals process take care of it. Today, he actually, I kind of, all due respect to him, disagree with a lot of what he said. I mean, he had many options. He could have imposed the sentence and then suspended it. He could have done a lot of things other than the unconditional discharge, but give him credit, he did seem to find the way through the minefield where if he had not said no jail time, real question if that Supreme Court vote would have been just a tad different and stopped the entire thing. So you give him credit for actually, in Bill Barr's words, landing the plane at this point.
And the fact of the matter is, even though there's no penalty, he still is going to take the oath of office.
This is all they wanted from the beginning. From the onset, they wanted him to be tainted, to be called a convicted felon being the president. Going into the White House, they wanted him to say, okay, I'm a convicted felon. This is what they wanted, and they won. The media won, okay? They've tried to call this man a convicted felon before, while he was doing the election. They always called him, he's a convicted felon, but he actually just became a convicted felon today. But guess what? His voters, 76 million people plus, including myself, we voted for him. We don't care about this because we just want to secure the border. We just want to bring back jobs. We want to bring back a great economy, okay? Low gas prices, low grocery bills, all right? Slash the energy price. Electricity bill by 50% in the first year. He said these things, and this man is a man of his word, and this is why I voted for him. I don't know why you voted for him, but I voted for him because I know he sticks to his words and he fights like hell to get the job done.
For the first time in U.S. history as a convicted felon.
Which is what is so extraordinary about this entire episode. Really, if this case had not come forward, there are serious questions if Donald Trump would have won the Republican presidential nomination. So in many respects, this entire episode, thinking back to when he first left Trump Tower, I think it was like in March or so of 2023, and you could just see, once this case sort of came, the party and his supporters rallied around him. So now we are full circle. Yes, he will be sworn in 10 days as a convicted felon, but the bigger picture is the people had a chance, the voters had a chance to weigh in on this, and they don't care about this particular case. So I think that it will be a piece of history, but today I don't think will be thought about for a long time. I mean, look.
Of course. At this point, it's like, man, everybody's just wondering what's going on. But it is what it is. This is what they wanted. They got it, and it's over.
Let's impose sentence, please.
Donald Trump, you are before the court for sentence following your conviction by trial to 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Before being sentenced, the court will allow you, your attorney, and the assistant district attorney an opportunity to address the court with any matters relevant to sentencing. For the people.
Thank you. Judge, where's the preferred place for me to stand?
Wherever you feel comfortable.
The defendant in this case, as you know, stands convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree, all Class E felonies. Each carries a range of authorized sentencing options for as much as 1 1/3 to 4 years in state prison to a variety of non-incarceratory sentences. In this court's January 3rd decision on the defendant's Clayton motion, Your Honor indicated an inclination to impose an unconditional discharge. Under all the circumstances of this case, its unique posture and the defendant's status as president-elect, the people recommend a sentence of an unconditional discharge. In finding the defendant guilty in this case, the jury necessarily found unanimously that the defendant falsified 34 separate entries in his business records with the intent to defraud, which included an intent to commit or conceal a conspiracy to promote his own election by unlawful means. Having presided over the trial, Your Honor is very familiar with the conduct, its seriousness, and the overwhelming evidence to support the jury's verdict. I'm certainly not going to rehash that now. In last week's decision on January 3rd, this court referred to the gravamen of the defendant's conduct, his criminal conduct in this case, as constituting, quote, premeditated and continuous deception. The verdict was delivered by a jury that was carefully chosen using an extensive questionnaire based on suggestions from both parties and after thorough questioning of the prospective jurors by both sides. The verdict in this case was unanimous and decisive, and it must be respected. As this court has observed, quote, the sanctity of a jury verdict and the deference that must be accorded to it is a bedrock principle in our nation's jurisprudence. The defendant's conduct before, during, and after this trial also merits consideration. Instead of preserving, protecting, and defending our constitutionally established system of criminal justice, the defendant, the once and future President of the United States, has engaged in a coordinated campaign to undermine its legitimacy. Far from expressing any kind of remorse for his criminal conduct, the defendant has purposefully bred disdain for our judicial institutions and the rule of law. And he's done this to serve his own ends and to encourage others to reject the jury verdict that he finds so distasteful. He has characterized these proceedings as corrupt, rigged, a witch hunt, or a sham too many times to tabulate. The defendant's rhetoric has only ratcheted up since this court's rulings on his motions to dismiss. He has been unrelenting in his unsubstantiated attacks upon this court and its family, individual prosecutors and their families, the witnesses, the grand jury, the trial jury, and the justice system as a whole. The defendant has not only been held in contempt by other jurists in other matters, but this court alone found the defendant in contempt for 10 distinct violations of the order restricting extrajudicial speech. In his legal filings, the defendant has used dangerous rhetoric in leveling accusations of intentionally unlawful and unconstitutional conduct on the part of this court and the prosecution. As this court has noted, the defendant's conduct, quote, constitutes a direct attack on the rule of law itself. Moreover, the defendant has publicly threatened to retaliate against the prosecutors who have sought to hold him accountable in this and other matters, and the courts who have endeavored to fairly and faithfully adjudicate these matters. Such threats are designed to have a chilling effect, to intimidate those who have the responsibility to enforce our laws, in the hopes that they will ignore the defendant's transgressions because they fear that he is simply too powerful to be subjected to the same rule of law as the rest of us. In his 2024 end-of-year report, United States Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts warned of the dangers of such conduct. Quote, "Public officials, too, regrettably, have engaged in recent attempts to intimidate judges. For example, suggesting political bias in the judge's adverse rulings without credible basis for such allegations," end quote. Chief Justice Roberts continued, quote, "Attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed. Public officials certainly have a right to criticize the work of the judiciary, but they should be mindful that intemperance in their statements when it comes to judges may prompt dangerous reactions by others." Chief Justice Roberts also spoke of the dangers of disinformation, which are, quote, "magnified by social media, which provides a ready channel to instantly spread rumor and false information." Put simply, this defendant has caused enduring damage to public perception of the criminal justice system and has placed officers of the court in harm's way. In the probation report, which we just received this morning, the author, having interviewed the defendant, noted that the defendant sees himself as above the law and won't accept responsibility for his actions. And that's certainly consistent with everything else that we've seen. Now, in a typical case, both the offense conduct and these other exacerbating factors would impact the appropriate sentence. But in this case, we must be respectful of the office of the presidency and mindful of the fact that the defendant will be inaugurated as president in 10 days. Any undischarged portion of a sentence has the potential to interfere with the defendant's performance of the duties of his office. As a practical matter, the most sensible sentence prior to his inauguration is an unconditional discharge. The court has expressed an inclination to do exactly that because, in the court's words, quote, "the most viable solution to ensure finality and allow defendant to pursue his appellate options is to proceed to sentence." As you know, in New York, a conditional discharge is authorized by penal law, quote, "if the court, having regard to the nature and circumstances of the offense and to the history, character, and condition of the defendant, is of the opinion that neither the public interest nor the ends of justice would be served by a sentence of imprisonment, and that probation supervision is not appropriate." An unconditional discharge is authorized if a conditional discharge is authorized and, quote, "if the court is of the opinion that no proper purpose would be served by imposing any condition upon the defendant's release." Because these crimes are felonies, the court must set forth in the record the reasons for its action. The American public has the right to a presidency unencumbered by pending court proceedings or ongoing sentence-related obligations. But imposing this sentence ensures that finality. Sentencing the defendant permits this court to enter judgment, to cement the defendant's status as a convicted felon while he pursues whatever appeals he intends to pursue. And it gives full effect and respect to the jury's verdict while preserving the defendant's ability to govern. People therefore recommend that this court impose a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I very much disagree with much of what the government just said about this case, about the legitimacy of what happened in this courtroom during the trial, and about President Trump's conduct fighting this case from before it was indicted, to while it was indicted, through the jury's verdict, and even to this day. What the government just said presupposes something that we disagree with very much, which was that this was an appropriate case to be brought. It was not. This case, without a doubt, knowing everything we know about the timing of the investigation, the fact that multiple prosecutors looked at the fact of this case, including prosecutors within the district attorney's office in New York County, and made a decision not to bring charges. As the court knows, shortly after President Trump announced his intention to run for re-election, this case was started for what amounted to a third time, which brings us ultimately to where we are today. A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that, and as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many, many, many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also on the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States. And certainly we're here for the court to sentence President Trump to an unconditional discharge. And for that, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day for President Trump and his family and friends. But it's also, in counsel's view, a sad day for this country, because this was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a district attorney who promised that he would go after President Trump if elected, and felt like he had to go through with that promise. And so that's sad. And I hope, and I know that President Trump shares this view, that this will never happen again in this country. And so we certainly understand where we are today. We very much intend on pursuing an appeal of this verdict and what happened during this investigation. And we certainly believe that the only appropriate sentence, if one's to be imposed at all, which we very much believe it shouldn't be, and that the case should be dismissed, is a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This was a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they say it, was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me, they were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them any. They called a legal fee or a legal expense a legal expense. And for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that. Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial. So they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated, and he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington, but he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or a bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with a city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to exclaim that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, you appear before this court today to conclude this criminal proceeding by the imposition of sentence. Although I have taken the unusual step of informing you in advance of my inclinations, before imposing sentence, I believe it is important for you, as well as those observing these proceedings, to understand my reasoning for the sentence I am about to impose. The imposition of sentence is one of the most difficult and significant decisions that any criminal court judge is called upon to make. Our legislature sets the parameters for an authorized sentence, but it is a judge that must decide what constitutes a just conclusion to a verdict of guilty. A court is vested with broad discretion in determining what sources or evidence it may consider to arrive at an appropriate sentence. In doing so, the court must consider the facts of the case along with any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. In my time on the bench, I've been called upon to grapple with this weighty responsibility for countless defendants who have been found guilty after trial for an assortment of offenses, ranging from nonviolent Class E felonies to the most heinous of crimes, including homicides, sex trafficking, and child sexual abuse. The task is always difficult and deserving of careful consideration, whether the sentence be an unconditional discharge or incarceration of 25 years to life. However, never before has this court been presented with such a unique and remarkable set of circumstances. Indeed, it can be viewed fairly that this has been a truly extraordinary case. There was unprecedented media attention, public interest, and heightened security involving various agencies. And yet, the trial was a bit of a paradox because once the courtroom doors were closed, the trial itself was no more special, unique, or extraordinary than the other 32 criminal trials that took place in this courthouse at the same exact time. Jury selection was conducted, the same rules of evidence were followed, opening statements were made, witnesses called and cross-examined, evidence presented, summations delivered, the same burden of proof was applied, and a jury made up of ordinary citizens delivered a verdict. And it was all conducted pursuant to the rules of procedure and guided by the law. Of course, part of what made it feel somewhat ordinary was the outstanding work, preparation, and professionalism of the clerks, court officers, court reporters, security personnel, and the entire staff of this building who did their jobs as they would with any other criminal trial. So while one can argue that the trial itself was in many respects somewhat ordinary, the same cannot be said about the circumstances surrounding this sentencing. And that is because of the office you once occupied and which you will soon occupy again. To be sure, it is the legal protections afforded to the office of the President of the United States that are extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. The legal protections, especially within the context of a criminal prosecution, afforded to the office of the President have been laid out by our founders, the Constitution, and most recently interpreted by the United States Supreme Court in the matter of Trump versus the United States, which was decided on July 1st, 2024. As with every other defendant in your position, it is my obligation to consider any and all aggravating and mitigating factors to inform my decision. Some of those aggravating factors have already been articulated in my Sandoval ruling at the start of this trial and by my recent written decisions on December 16th and January 3rd. Thus, they need not be repeated at this time. However, the considerable, indeed, extraordinary legal protections afforded by the office of the Chief Executive is a factor that overrides all others. To be clear, the protections afforded the office of the president are not a mitigating factor. They do not reduce the seriousness of the crime or justify its commission in any way. The protections are, however, a legal mandate, which, pursuant to the rule of law, this court must respect and follow. However, despite the extraordinary breadth of those protections, one power they do not provide is the power to erase a jury verdict. It is clear from legal precedent, which until July 1st was scarce, that Donald Trump, the ordinary citizen, Donald Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to such considerable protections. I'm referring to protections that extend well beyond those afforded the average defendant who winds their way through the criminal justice system each day. No, ordinary citizens do not receive those legal protections. It is the office of the president that bestows those far-reaching protections to the office holder. And it was the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, which include, among other things, the Supremacy Clause and presidential immunity. It is through that lens and that reality that this court must determine a lawful sentence. After careful analysis, in obedience to governing mandates, and pursuant to the rule of law, this court has determined that the only lawful sentence that permits entry of a judgment of conviction without encroaching upon the highest office in the land is an unconditional discharge, which the New York State Legislature has determined is a lawful and permissible sentence for the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree. Therefore, at this time, I impose that sentence to cover all 34 counts. Sir, I wish you Godspeed as you assume your second term in office. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the live show. Yes, we have come to the end of the live show. You guys are the best. I gotta go. I gotta go be a daddy, and we're gonna be right back soon. Okay. God bless you. Instead of looking for perfection, seek for consistency. God is great. Stay strong, and I love you guys. And never give up on yourself. Never ever give up on yourself. All right. It is what it is. We will be back. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. BG, God bless you. Um, God is great, y'all. I love you guys. I will be back, and we're gonna come back with more updates. Subscribe to the channel. Join the membership. It is $4.99. If you like what you see, God bless you. God is great. Stay strong. I love you guys. It is boy Genesis. I'm signing out. All right, here we go.